Okay, everybody, we got to get into our zen. We're all rooting for Vaush, okay, guys?
Is critical race theory the biggest threat to America, or is it at least a threat to America? Well, there's a lot of questions around that. Obviously, you guys know my position on this to a certain degree, but there's a lot of other issues we need to talk about. One of the biggest stories right now is that New York has imposed we'll call it I don't want to say limited, but it's a vaccine mandate for indoor activities, entertainment performances. And Bill de Blasio said the goal here is to encourage people, mostly young people, to get the vaccine. That means if you want to go to the movie theaters, if you want to engage in normal activities like at bars, you have to have a vaccine passport. You have to have proof. They call it Key to NYC. Now, why do I bring up critical race theory? Well, for one, you know the title of this video. We're going to have a conversation, a political debate or discussion about this. But there is a question some people have brought up due to the low level of vaccination.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a discussion between Charlie Kirk and Vaush. Yeah, buddy.
Affect people and whether or not this will be truly equitable. But today, the bigger thing we're doing is not just about the news. It's about a conversation with two prominent individuals in politics. We've got Charlie Kirk, who I'm sure most of you know. Do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Charlie Kirk.
God, his face is so small. I'm mean. I shouldn't do that, but
I guess you could say
every time I see it, man,
conservative.
I don't understand it.
More than that.
Maybe it's because
he's
of
kind of
projection.
smiling, but I can barely tell.
Of course, we have Vaush. Join it.
Howdy. Yeah.
He's got the
Vaush.
white suit.
I'm a YouTuber.
Wait, no, that's not a suit.
I guess I call myself a libertarian socialist. I like some parts of the country. I'm a big fan of some parts of it. Some other parts I think could use some improvement.
Right on. Now, we've got Ian here, as per usual.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be in the chat today watching your super chats, so keep sending them in, and I'll be clipping them so that we can get to it at the end of the show.
super chats for this.
Hi.
And I'm very
Riper
excited.
Lover 923 here.
I'm excited for this conversation. I'm going to be switching like a crazy person. And
I've got my camera on as well if you want.
Oh, yeah, sure. I can get that up.
And before we jump in, head over to timcast.com, become a member to get an ad-free experience and exclusive access to members-only segments of this show. And I guess I wasn't initially planning on, but I guess everyone's cool to do a member segment after the show, and we'll find something fun to talk about. So, we'll see how it plays out. So make sure you become a member. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, share it with your friends. If you think this conversation is important, I'm sure there are many right-wing individuals like, get him, Charlie, crush Vaush. And there's a lot of left-wing people being like, Vaush is going to own. Well, share it with your friends, and let's have a good conversation.
A good conversation.
I suppose we can we can start with one of two things. Obviously, I brought up critical race theory,
bald
but
eagle
also
himself.
the vaccine issue. I'm not sure if you guys have a preference for what you were...
We can talk about the vaccine.
Why don't we talk about what's going on with vaccine passports?
Sure.
We've seen in Sydney, for instance, they issued a lockdown. Or I should say enough people ignored it. They went out in the streets, and then this resulted in news articles saying chaos in Sydney. People aren't, they're not following the rules. The vaccination rate in Australia is ridiculously low. I think it's 18%, really low. Well, then they called in police, and there were big protests. Now they've actually.
By the way, I'm hosting a debate with Lawrence Southern and the Surfs tomorrow. That's going to be fun.
Thoughts on
mandates?
What would happen if they came here, if it's for or against them?
That'll be exciting.
Look, there are elements of mandates that I can agree with. We've already set standards for other things like the MMR vaccine, very basic standard vaccines that we expect everyone to get before they can go to school, travel. And I think for the most part that's worked. We've eradicated plagues from the world. I think we should be proud of that. With regards to COVID, since this is an ongoing pandemic, we need to focus on approaches that are effective and that don't ostracize or exacerbate tensions. With regard to the Australian situation, it's not something I'm extensively familiar with, but generally speaking, I don't think that cracking down on protests is going to be an effective way to incentivize people to get vaccinated. What's happening in New York might be, but my main issue with it is that I'm not entirely sure how they expect people to still have their vaccination card. I know that there's been some confusion from the beginning as to whether or not you should keep that. I know people have thrown theirs away. They made it too big for
people
wallets.
It
just felt a little
protested
bit
in Parliament, like
planned
stormed
from
it
the
to like protest
so that's
like
unfortunate.
vaccine cards.
Maybe
in,
they can find
Italy
other ways
recently.
to incentivize it, like for example,
Yeah, I saw
schools,
those videos.
where they have direct access to government records, where they wouldn't have to use those little cards. That might be a little bit better. I guess we'll have to see.
Apparently, it's a bit worse in Europe than it is in America.
Some people on the left, I never want to hear about the discussion of voter ID ever again. Because now you can force people to identify their medical history.
The fucking
to
voter ID.
No!
I'm not getting the vaccine.
Count Dankula got angry at me because I said the comparison was stupid.
Unvaccinated.
Blair White was doing that today as well.
The FDA and CDC has said that in January. It's questionably effective. Lindsey Graham just came down with COVID. You had a ship in the United Kingdom, 100% vaccinated ship that came down with COVID. It's more like a treatment than a vaccine. I'll leave that conversation to Dr. Brett Weinstein and the people that really understand. how that works. But yeah, this is medical apartheid.
0.01%
This is
of
trying to create
people
a two-tiered system
count
where if you
COVID.
don't
It's
make
so
the proper
unlikely
medical
if you get
decisions,
vaccinated.
you're not able to go to Broadway shows or go into restaurants, even when the efficacy of this vaccine is questionable at best. We see that in Israel, an 85% vaccinated country that's about to lock down again. And most of the new cases are from vaccinated patients, not unvaccinated patients in Israel. So, sorry, you want to interject him? But
yeah.
Obviously against mandates, and I think people should be able to make their own medical decisions. I think it's pretty obvious.
Well, I disagree. I think we actually have a story we wrote on timcast.com that our view of the lockdowns is that it's alarmism because a new study from the Public Health of England found the Pfizer vaccine is 96% effective after 2 doses at staving off the Delta variant, and AstraZeneca was 92%.
I could probably agree it's alarmism, but it's enough of an alarm for the public health leaders to undermine the argument that the vaccine is a solution to what would possibly satisfy the public.
So,
I mean, I was against the lockdowns in the first place. Let me be very clear when there was 1,000 deaths a day, not 334. But sorry, go ahead.
Well, a couple of points on this. First of all, it's experimental in the sense that there was an expedited process for its release, but there have been full and extensive studies taken on the safety and effectiveness of these vaccines. The reason why the FDA study hasn't been finished, the reason why it hasn't been fully vetted, isn't because they're looking for long-term health effects. It's because they're determining the extent to which it protects you over a long period.
I can't see you, Dylan. I'm in the dark here.
Ergo,
I've got chat.
The fact
and
of
I've
the
got
matter is, by all available data, this is undeniably much safer to get the vaccine. I mean, by orders of magnitude.
Let me ask you a question.
Well, wait, a couple things, because you said a few things there. There are some instances where areas have more people being infected if they're already vaccinated. But if you take a look at, this is like data mining. If you take a look at the broader statistics, especially here in America, the number of people who have gotten breakthrough cases is something like 0.003% of people who have been vaccinated.
0.004.
You can take a look at the numbers. Where is this new wave exploding? It's in the unvaccinated.
Vaush crushed once again.
In spite of the fact that fewer and fewer people are remaining unvaccinated,
I'll be going nuts
the vaccinated stay relatively healthy. And not only do they get infected way less often, they also suffer far fewer severe symptoms. Their hospitalization rates have plummeted, and their deaths are incredibly low compared to people who are unvaccinated. This is by all means an effective vaccine.
What's your opinion of Johnson & Johnson, the FDA saying that it might cause a rare nerve disease?
That's something that, first of all, when you take a look at that, you have to recognize that even if that was the case.
Which the FDA says it is.
Right, well, they're looking into it, of course.
They'd issued an official warning that it could issue a rare nerve disease. That's a big deal.
Could issue, of course. They're looking into it, and that is something to look into and to be concerned about.
What's your opinion of VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System?
They officially put out an issue that it could cause something.
They officially said maybe.
They officially said maybe. Stuff like that can happen. Now, even if that claim is the case, it would remain the fact that unless
officially said I maybe banged your wife.
He's doing a good job.
Just
he's doing a good job so far. That's not false.
The effects of getting COVID would still be far, far worse than the potential side effects of that vaccine. However, if you were to say, let's say worst case, Johnson & Johnson, it's not viable, that gets pulled, we see what the consequences are, that doesn't really speak against the greater viability of the vaccines. I got Pfizer, for example. We're talking hundreds of millions of people who have either been protected against the vaccine in part, or if they get it, against the virus, or if they get it, their effects, their symptoms are much, much, much more manageable.
So I just want to just play into the irony here that I'm the one criticizing the pharmaceutical companies and you're the one defending. I just think that's I think it's delicious.
That's an extremely dishonest talking.
You're peddling the Pfizer vaccine. You're saying it's so effective. So many people have taken it. But I'm the one saying, hold on, maybe AstraZeneca, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer.
This is let's talk about the points he's made. And
no, I was just enjoying the irony.
Well, the thing is, it's not really like irony if you understand the issue at hand. See, my praise doesn't go to the pharmaceutical companies or their CEOs. It goes to the tireless workers who spend months and months and months developing these vaccines.
Who's getting rich from this vaccine?
Well, hold on. Have I at any point praised the distribution or profiteering system?
Who do you think gets rich
Pfizer?
from vaccine mandates? The workers or the Pfizer CEO?
Nobody's talking about who gets rich. This is a toothless...
Isn't that your whole shtick?
Hold on. This is a toothless critique that you could...
Let's try and go back and forth. Man.
This is a toothless critique that you could apply to literally anything that you don't like. Everything in this country is manufactured to the profit of CEOs.
We don't mandate it, and so you can't go to restaurants if you don't get one of four major pharmaceutical medicines.
Wait, I just want to say, if that's your criticism,
that's one of many.
Then you should. So if that's the criticism you want to focus on, I'm in favor of nationalizing the pharmaceutical industry. I'm willing to take it that far.
He's so desperate for
whether or not that's on the table, and I can't
voter ID first, and then it was
when we're talking strictly about the effectiveness of the vaccine. It seems to be effective. That's not a praise of the capitalist industry behind it.
No, I was just enjoying the irony. That's all.
Not irony.
It's not ironic.
It's totally ironic because I'm the one saying that they might be lying to us. You're
Don't
the one
give him
that's
an inch,
saying it's
Vaush.
super effective.
Wait, what
Which
lie?
usually, if we were
Just
wearing
keep on
our
doing it.
traditional
Keep on doing
uniforms,
it.
As he gets
right
angrier,
versus
his
left
face
would be the
gets
other
smaller,
way.
so
That's
his
all.
voice gets
the
higher.
only comment I'm making
What
is
do
as
you have
to
to
the
say about
effectiveness
VAERS,
of the
though? What do you have
vaccine.
to say about the vaccine adverse event reporting system that says, well, over 7,000 people experienced death after getting the vaccine? Does that worry you?
The VAERS system is entirely self-reported. I don't think it's generally
look at
Do you
used
think
the
it's
for an accurate
underreported
metric.
or overreported?
With VAERS, it's almost impossible to say. You know what VAERS is, right? Can you tell me what VAERS
Yeah,
is?
VAERS is a government
0.004%
website that
chance of
physicians
hospitalization.
or individuals can submit
0.001%
complaints after an
of death.
adverse
Super
event
small,
report
just
from a vaccine.
considering the
Since
scale.
you cannot win in court against a vaccine production company, then they go through some process where the government then can distribute some form of remedy if you had an adverse event reaction.
Right,
That's what VAERS is.
And researchers like it because if you take a vaccine or you get some other procedure, any medical drug done, you can report the effects there, and it can be a way of gathering sort of aggregate data concerning the effects of these potential treatments. The problem is researchers don't use this as a bulletproof way of determining the outcome or effect of anything because they're literally just unvetted online submissions that anybody can put in.
So I agree.
I ask you because I want to know, how do you arrive at the conclusion that how many people did you say
Well,
applied?
it's VAERS' own data is 7,000 plus, and most of which, by the way,
That anyone can submit.
no.
But I'm asking,
By the
how
way,
do you
most of
arrive-
which are physicians submitted. Just so you know, these are
the total number.
the most of the submissions on the VAERS website are done by like family
okay.
doctors
That could be
or
60%.
local physicians.
That could be
So
still
I'm
a
just
large amount of
asking
it could
what
still not be
number of adverse
submitted
event
by
reactions
physicians.
would you say maybe there's something wrong?
But I'm asking, how do you-
10,000 deaths.
how do you know these deaths were caused by
20,000 deaths?
vaccines?
No, I'm just saying that's what VAERS says, right?
No, wait, but so I need to know this.
We
because
don't.
You can, so
That's the
VAERS
question.
So wait, is these just people who have died after taking the vaccine? Like they may have died from some medical incident afterwards, and it just gets put up there. And
This is the question.
Because
Usually,
of
a
the
vaccine gets pulled when you have 15 attributable deaths. We have 7,000 that we have to go through. The question is, when do you call timeout
Wait,
and say,
well, the
maybe we
difference
should
You're not
is
answering
they
the
do it on a
question.
mass
How do you know
scale.
that they're from the vaccine?
We don't. That's the point.
Oh.
He hasn't
You
said
don't
7,000
either.
of how many,
The
has he?
position is let's
Yeah, and he
mandate
admits
experimental
that
medicine.
not all of them are even
we
submitted
don't
by
know
physicians.
actually what's
Well,
happening.
if you don't
okay,
know,
yeah.
then how
It's
can you
just
say
some of
that
them are
medical
physicians,
doctor is
yeah.
the one uploading this
Well,
information?
no,
Is there
because
any methodology you're
we
looking at
we
to
do
determine
know
these
who's
deaths were
actually
from it?
uploading it. We know that. We know the entries are usually
the
and
claims
typically
being made?
traditionally.
Usually,
How about
okay.
menstrual cycle disruption, loss of nerve capacity,
Mm-hmm.
unable to walk, paralysis, miscarriages, mood changes. Also, you could go through the VAERS database like, oh, that's interesting.
I'm sorry to
I-
lower this for a
but are we-
second, but
what about
I
the
love
death?
that Charlie
Let me
Kirk,
interject
like the
something.
first
7,000
topic,
plus.
and he's
That's
already
How
basically
do you
just
know it's from the vaccine?
almost convincing
Ask
people
me
not
Let
to
me-
get
let
it.
me
Like,
address 2 points,
this is
one
what
from
Charlie
each
is
real
doing
quick,
on the
and
first
try and,
topic already.
How do we
Even
know
though
from the
Tim
vaccine?
tried
Yeah,
to pull him
It's a
away
difficult-
from it.
Difficult question.
I don't think they're going to make the
that
connection
if
that this is like
have
you can do this
a
with
mass
any
vaccination
medication. Like
program,
every medical
Yeah.
procedure on earth has a long,
Like,
and then
like
people
ages
start
long list of
saying, hey,
potential
Did
side
you look at all
effects.
these children that choked
VAERS
on like
isn't
gummy
here to
Flintstones?
say-
It's terrible,
isn't
man.
here to say, can we
Very
find
true,
pattern in
yeah.
this? And I think
We have a
7,000
database.
suggests there may be one at the very
Pictures
least.
and all.
I'm not a scientist, so I can't stress that. I will also say, however, to Charlie,
Tim Bill's not a
Guillain-Barré
scientist.
syndrome, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, it's a
Really?
side effect.
always mispronounce.
That
What?
surprises me.
Guillain-Barré. There you go.
Yeah, something like that.
My understanding is actually a side effect of many vaccines.
Yeah, it is.
And so,
Totally, that's correct. It could be.
well, so the issue I have is one of the things
It
that
could
Vaush
be,
brought up is
maybe,
that there's
possibly.
been how many?
Not all
Boom,
physicians.
boom,
Like a lot of
boom.
maybes here today.
In the
115, I think it is, million.
who have been fully vaccinated?
Fully vaccinated.
I think in that ballpark.
So
Maybe a
of
bit
course, you know, if you have something very different.
My editors
from,
also tell me it's extremely
any other
rare.
vaccination we normally do because
Yeah.
we're not having everyone do it all at once.
Yeah, and so this is a mass inoculation thing. And so here's why the American system should answer this question easily. When you have any sort of uncertainty or disagreement, yield to rights.
So
Yield to rights. Allow
Well,
people to
so-
say no. Let me just build out the argument, right? So for me, for example,
just
I'm
feels like
27. I don't
grandstanding.
consider COVID to be a largely disproportionate risk to my way of life. I don't know about this vaccine. I have gotten other vaccines in my life. So I want to be able to have the right to say no to that.
That
So
Joe
the American
Biden paint in the
system,
background is
Constitution,
fucking with my
kinda
head.
like the tradition is to be able to have
that Joe
people
Biden?
have nuance,
Yep, it is.
preferences
Eating a girl's
and
hand.
individualism.
Yep.
When it comes to these sort of complex issues, not
weird,
saying you
man.
can't go to a restaurant
That's, like,
because
really
we want you to
fucking
take
Freudian.
experimental medicine.
Right. So a couple of points on that. First of all, if we're speaking to legal rights,
I like the sword.
Supreme Court found over
True.
a century ago.
I think that is a
that
strong
when it came
statement.
to vaccinations.
Ooh, and it's behind
this was a
Vaush,
special
showing him to be
exemption
the
for
true
people's
hero.
Rights to
I will
determine their
agree with
medical
you
history.
that the
It's
courts
like
are not on my side.
1904 in that one, and there's a reason why. Because of course, when you choose not to take the vaccine, you contribute to the removal of others' freedoms. See, it's true. You do have a freedom to not or to take a vaccine, but I think other people should have the freedom to not grow up in a world ridden by plague. And with the way this disease, COVID, mutates with time, as all diseases do, inevitably,
Look at the Delta
if
variant.
it continues to circle the world long enough, and
I
this
was
is an
covering that the
international
other day.
problem, not just an
Yeah,
American
that was-
one, new strains will develop, which will slowly.
That's
ebb
why you
at
can't
the
you can't even just let
effectiveness of this
natural
set of
selection
vaccines.
take its
It
place. You know,
threatens all
you
of
have to
us.
suffer the consequences of other people
may I say
not
one
getting
other
it.
thing? Sorry. With all of that being said, just to speak to VARS, VARS is an incredibly effective system for locating and roughly attributing concerns related to the effects of drugs. The problem is that there are several elements to this disease that make it really difficult to pinpoint anything specific. The two of which being A, hundreds of millions of people vaccinated. That is a huge range to pull data from. And B, the propagandist fear campaign about an incredibly effective vaccine process that may lead people to misattribute
I just want to get a
deaths
quick
that they
clarification.
experience to vaccines.
Sorry.
But just quick clarification. Are you for mandating
That's a good point at the end.
COVID-19 vaccine?
Really good point.
The same way we have other vaccines like school, travel, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, like, what if someone wanted to go to a restaurant or a supermarket or a movie theater?
I think that, I mean, we don't have that for other vaccines, right? Like every time you go to a movie theater, you have a little card. I understand that might be an effective panic measure, but long term, my goal would be to integrate it into the same revenue of vaccines.
I think that's a more reasonable response than some politicians. I'm just going to be honest.
People
That's-
are panicking. And
No,
they
I think that's a
should.
more
People die.
well. Yeah.
I just want to make sure we
Right.
weren't having, like, misunderstanding.
No, I
over
think that's
whether-
more of a reasonable answer. I just curious, just on the vaccine topic in general. Are you concerned by like Dr. Malone coming out, who literally invented the mRNA vaccine and says that there's a dangerous spike protein involved, and he encourages people to think twice before getting it? Does that move you at all?
Well, you're free to speak with your doctor when it comes to a
No, Dr. Malone, just his specific commentary. Does
His
that,
specific
the guy
commentary.
who invented this type
Right.
of vaccine.
Well, I'm not a PhD, and I doubt that he was directly involved in the production of these
no,
vaccines.
he literally invented this type
the
of
mRNA,
vaccine.
but with the like Johnson & Johnson, the Pfizer, the Moderna.
But he's very, very aware of the sort of accelerated implementation. He's trying to call time out and tell people this is not like any other vaccine.
What
Does
is
that
his
worry
claim?
you? His claim is that
Well, he's
it
not
involves
trying to
spike
call
protein,
time
it was
out.
rushed
I don't
to
think he
market,
said stop
it's going to have
production,
side
stop-
effects.
stop
You
the
don't understand it
presses.
like I did. I invented
I'm
this.
pretty sure that he
and
didn't
you got to
invent it,
think
did he?
twice before
Is that
mandating it
true?
or even taking
I
it
have
if
no
you're
clue.
under a certain age. Does that bother you?
What makes the current retinue of vaccines that we take, the mRNA process, different from other mRNA
It doesn't involve the
vaccines?
spike protein, according to him, the same composition as like the measles, mumps, rubella type vaccine or the chickenpox vaccine.
Well, those weren't mRNA. The process wasn't developed back during the MMR vaccine.
Totally, but some of them are getting updated for the more mRNA type technology,
But
right?
he wasn't involved in the production of these modern vaccines. How could he possibly have any comment on any of the rigors or tests that were done
Because he
before?
invented this type of vaccine. I'm
Being
just saying,
told
does
that
that
it's
bother
very
you? You think
BS
he's just
right
like a
now
fear
in the chat.
propagandist
I'm
and
sending
like,
articles.
He may well
Yeah,
have concerns, but those are concerns that I would rather have addressed by the scientific community.
Like, it's really
rather than with
uncommon to
respect
have
you
one
myself,
sole inventor
YouTubers.
anyway.
Well, no, I agree. So, but the question is which scientists, right? So there's a
No,
lot of
this is like on
scientists
loads
speaking
of
out
fact
against
check
this.
websites.
Dr.
This is
Brett
bullshit.
Weinstein, Dr. Malone,
just showed it on
What is
screen.
Dr. Brett Weinstein's
He's an
specialty?
evolutionary biologist, so he knows a little bit about how
That's not virology.
cellular function
no,
works.
that is not virology.
let me-
that is a completely spurious
So let me
association.
just, do you trust Fauci more or Dr. Brett Weinstein?
It's not about Fauci. It's about Fauci.
He's a virologist who's been wrong about everything.
It's about
Well,
the
let's-
global. Well, hold on. He's smiling
he
with glee
hasn't.
here. It's the global medical community in this regard.
You mean like
hold
the,
on,
you mean like
really-
the WHO? Like
So, no,
I mean,
I'm not. Hold on. Wait.
Put a
please,
name
please.
behind it. Though.
Wait. He's very excited to interrupt me.
Yeah, let's-
no,
let's-
I just want to say it's not just about the WHO. We're talking about a unified effort on the part of
Hey,
virtually
why is
every
Charlie
country on
Kirk
Earth
so
to get
mad?
a hold of the vaccines
He's
that us
really-
Americans are privileged to have.
he's just like-
this isn't just some. This isn't.
I mean,
some,
I'm
like,
not saying that, like,
pharmacy
because
that
Lamau,
Fauci
he disagrees with me,
pushed
but
that
he's-
wasn't broadly
he's
supported
very,
by any
like-
of the relevant experts.
like,
In the mRNA
giddy and
field,
jumpy.
which is not huge because it's a very new development. Internationally,
Where does all that
there
training
is
go?
a
It's really
demand for these
bizarre.
vaccines.
I wanted to add, just based on what you had said, I can pull up Reuters. Their fact check is that vaccines are not, quote, cytotoxic. They go on to mention that Robert Malone, and they show the Brett Weinstein podcast, they show the Post, the FDA was alerted months ago that the spike protein in the COVID vaccines are cytotoxic, toxic to cells. The FDA did nothing. Reuters says this is not true. Now, the issue at hand
I got
is
one right here
trust.
from PolitiFact as
like
well.
you mentioned, you said
I showed it on
Fauci
stream
over
earlier.
Weinstein. I don't know if there is a fact-based argument if you have the doctors you trust and the doctors you trust or the organizations you trust. It's a clash of who you believe, to be honest.
None of us have the credentials to just come up with these arguments on their own. There will always be bias in who we choose to believe. However, given the plurality of people seem to support the safety and
unexpected
effectiveness
heel
of the
turn
vaccine,
here.
I can't wait for him,
it doesn't take
like
a
Charlie, to
virologist
turn to him.
notice
It
that
too, Brutus.
Over 500,000 Americans have died of COVID, more than the combined death tolls of every war since World War I combined, including the Second World War in Vietnam. Those are things that I don't need to be a virologist to see. I can see it
Can I ask you a
happening.
question,
That's
though?
pretty bad.
One of the issues that's brought up frequently, especially on Twitter, is that many of these COVID deaths are died with COVID, as it's brought up, where people would say something like it tends to be people who are over 70 or things like that. I'm only bringing that up not to make the argument, but because you said, how would VAERS know if these are actually related to the vaccine?
I'd love to respond to that if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
So COVID rarely, directly kills
Why
you.
does Tim Pool
Like
seem
age,
reasonable?
it causes
'Cause
a
he's next to
breakdown
Charlie
of other
Kirk.
vital functions that then
Very
their
well.
death can be attributed as such.
I
so
think
for
Tim Pool has a
example, of the many
soft spot
things
for
that
Vaush.
people die, it's not really COVID.
Maybe.
It's just that COVID
I think that's
blanks
He
their
got attacked a
entire
lot for
system
platforming
internally, and
Vaush, so maybe
eventually
this is
something
like,
fails, something breaks and they die.
he's kinda flipped
there
a
were
little bit
people
on him.
claiming that there were deaths being spuriously attributed to COVID-19 very early on in this pandemic, but thankfully we know that's not the case, because if you take a look at the excess mortality numbers, the number of people who should die every year in the United States, because there's a very normal pattern, normally with this many people in this country, we see an excess starting when COVID started that almost perfectly graphs on to the rising death waves of COVID. I mean, it perfectly tracks onto that.
I just want to say for you, Charlie, I think, the issue I see here is, for me, it's I can't trust or distrust. I don't know. I think Brett Weinstein's a very smart guy, and I don't think he's going to lie to me. And these doctors are very smart people. And then I see the government agencies that, I don't always trust the government, to be completely honest. I'm not a big fan. But to believe that there's like a nefarious effort or anything like that, ultimately what it comes down to is, in my opinion, having a trusted medical professional that you can consult with.
Well, I totally agree. And I think there could be an argument that if you're over the age of 70, that this vaccine might be a really good idea for you. However, to mandate it for schools and for colleges, when these are highly complex medical decisions, that's where I'm going to push back against it.
You can't just say it's complicated.
Let me point
That's
out.
your excuse
The
for not
Johnson &
doing
Johnson
anything.
vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine, though. Is that's
Should
my
we cure
understanding?
cancer? I don't know. It's
I don't
very
wanna speak out of
complicated.
I believe
Certainly
so.
is.
I would
I
love to
think
be
that's right.
fact checked on that.
I'm not totally sure.
My memory is
So
faulty.
I guess another question I have,
He
what do you
looks a
think
bit
of
flustered though, doesn't he?
alternative type treatments, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin? Why the push for mass inoculation?
Well, because hydroxychloroquine studies have found it largely ineffective. There was, I believe, a French study that stopped when people started dying of heart failure. I think the only reason the right dies on this hill is because Trump mentioned it. I don't think there'd be a push for it otherwise. The vaccines are the effective way of getting mass populations inoculated. And while it is true that most of the people who die are ancient, the fact remains that people experience long-term side effects from getting COVID, even if they survive. I know people who are in their 30s, and me, a blistering 27-year-old myself, I'm not especially worried, but I've heard them talk about how much harder it is for them to climb up flights of stairs. I know that erectile dysfunction, fellas, is one of the listed potential side effects of getting COVID, even young, healthy, no other problems. It is true that death is most
Anti-vaxxers got no working
comorbid
ding-dongs.
with age and pre-existing conditions, but still. And that's not even to speak of the COVID variants. I mean, right now we're on, Delta? But if it keeps cycling around the world, let it go for another year. Who knows how bad this could get?
So Johnson & Johnson is not an mRNA vaccine. So there's an alternative to mRNA if you're concerned about it.
And there was some guidance.
Someone
with
should
the
just
disease.
publish
I do think we kind of
some
overlooked something really
research saying
interesting
that
is
people. Someone
when
should just
did we
say that COVID
mandate
lowers your
vaccinations in public
testosterone.
schools?
That would work.
True.
That
would solve everything.
COVID is soy-based.
Was in 1904.
That
so
would
I
be a
know it
noble
would
lie.
Have to have been earlier than that. I know that
COVID's
Washington
vegan and
even had
soy-based,
its troops
guys.
vaccinated
That would
for
justify
smallpox.
Plato's noble lie
Smallpox,
right
was it?
there.
Yeah.
Which is pretty
I'd be
crazy.
right
to think
behind
about.
Inoculated, not vac. Yeah, you're right.
Right, I don't know what they did. Hit people with a rock and then
It was
pour
like
liquid
a
in.
needle, I think.
It was-
and they would prick you with the needle that had like a weakened sample or something.
And they would have had to forge that needle, like with a blacksmith. Isn't that crazy to think about? Like Washington's
I know, like someone pouring it, and then today it's just a machine that makes it.
That's just
Look,
wild
Tim
to think
Pool's like
about.
very
Well,
slowly
so-
falling in love. It's
Man,
amazing.
I think the real issue, for the most part, is just mandatory.
Well, I just also have another question. Do you think that there might be any bad motives behind these four companies, AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson, considering they are big pharma, and they pursue profits, which
yeah, they wanna
generally,
make
as a
money, but
libertarian
besides
socialist,
that,
you're skeptical of. Do you think maybe they might have nefarious motives?
Oh, their intentions are reprehensible. They have for many years made money off the backs of American deaths. The opioid crisis is almost entirely attributable to the malfeasance.
And the Sackler family.
Yeah, I mean, no moral love for these companies. If this could be, and by the way, the mRNA process was developed through public funding. It was, an effort invested in by the collective good, something I'm generally supportive of. When it comes to these companies themselves, and when I say, go get your Pfizer vaccine, whatever, please do not mistake this or anything else that I say for an endorsement of the practices of these companies. It is only through cruel twist of fate and the economic system we live in that they are the ones put in a position to handle this. But it was the workers at those companies, not the CEOs, who did the work.
I'm just curious, does that ever make you stop short and say, maybe
is doing really well.
They're trying to massively inoculate us on a vaccine that might not be as effective to try to
Charlie
pursue
has
profit,
practical
not well-being? Does
media
that ever
training too.
enter into your...
I know, and where the fuck
a
does it all
calculation.
go? He's
It's
like,
a
this is the
consideration you
fourth
should
time
take
he's
about
tried to say,
anything
well,
produced by any company
but do
that's
you
run
not
for
think as
profit,
someone who
which is-
genuinely
He
like
keeps
CEOs,
getting back to the same point and failing.
basically
He needs to
every
pivot or
need in
something.
American society is tempered by the knowledge that there are people out there who are paid very
I think
large
that's all he's
salaries
got. I
to
don't
sell
think he
it to
can
you.
think on his
This is
feet.
the case for everything we do, everything we eat. Every time you run down Main Street, or in my case, I guess, the boulevards in Los Angeles, you're seeing the protracted efforts of a billion-dollar industry to make sure you want things they're selling. Could that be the case for COVID? Undeniably, there was a profit incentive involved. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. And there was probably a protracted effort on the part of these companies to make sure they were the first, and they probably took every dirty advantage they could
What
get.
if
With the data available, I have to still, much as I would say, hey, I would prefer eating McDonald's food to starvation, I have to say this is probably still something we should be doing.
Do you want to do? I don't want to stay. It's been 20 minutes.
No,
so
for
do you
sure.
Do you want to make a final point?
Maybe you would starve instead.
I
of
actually
McDonald's,
think
I don't
this
know.
has been really constructive and not like that
Constructive.
Inflammatory. I think that deep down you have this kind of, urge that I'm already there, where maybe they want this thing to go on for another decade, to go make another $100
What are you
billion,
talking-
and maybe the cheap drug of hydroxychloroquine or
You
ivermectin
need evidence.
might work
You can't
better
just
than they might
suggest
think.
that.
I don't have that urge.
Other studies would disagree with me.
Oh,
Really.
God,
we could
that's-
change the
yeah.
topic. I just think
Damn.
it's
So
that was a healthy discourse.
Damn,
Can I
that
meet in
was
the
a
middle on that
slap,
one, on that
man.
very last one?
Yeah.
I do not trust the pharmaceutical industries, though the available evidence does seem to point to the effectiveness of the vaccines. I say this, nationalize the pharma industry. Seriously. It could be used for the collective good, and I would unironically actually trust it more in the hands of our ineffective, bloated government than I would
The thing is,
the
that point
sociopaths
looks
who
better
run it
now because
currently.
Charlie
So
the whole time has been
I'll
attacking
wrap
the
this up by
profit motive,
saying,
which probably is not
always
great
talk
for
to your
like
doctor.
TP
This
USA
is one of the
angle.
biggest things. Like YouTube is very strict on this, especially. But I genuinely think this is the right answer. If you're watching this, don't assume anyone here is right or wrong. I mean, I'm sure there are people who think Charlie's made a bunch of good points, and you have. Ultimately, it's down between you and your doctor. And I'll stress, for whatever your opinion, Charlie, I understand. Hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin haven't been approved by the FDA, and so that's just another.
We're just asking questions whether
Right.
it works or not.
So that's why I think it's really important, because I think there are. I got to be honest. In regards to ivermectin, people have been eating horse paste that they sell. I looked up what the FDA says about it. They say do not do this, and they actually give a very good reason. They say, although people are claiming that if an animal can take it, someone else can. That's not true. There's some things that dogs can't have that humans can. So
Right.
please talk to your doctor. And I definitely hope we can
Don't
continue
eat
having
horse
question
paste.
debates about this stuff,
Tim
because
Pool.
that was vastly important. I'm really glad you guys were able to have that
I
conversation.
hadn't
People
even
is really
heard of
holding the
horse
balance
paste thing.
here.
That's
Yes.
horrifying.
Ivermectin is
Doing a
It's like
really
that
good job,
fucking statue
actually.
that holds the
Off-label
scales.
use.
Yeah.
Unironically.
Yeah, it's a dewormer, and so you can go to like Tractor Supply and they have.
We'll
them
see
have
when
a
we get to
sign that
critical
says, like,
race
"Do
theory,
not
though,
eat
because
this."
that's something he has an
Any
opinion
drug
on.
for horses will burn a
Yeah, he's
human
like a
out from
much
the
more-
inside.
I feel
Those
like
things
you
are
might, yeah.
interesting.
You've been near they're tight.
Maybe do you?
So
do you
let's
think maybe he
let's
wants
talk
to kind of
about
do this a little
the
bit
other
for this topic, so when he
big
gets to
topic,
CRT,
critical race theory.
he doesn't look as
This
biased.
is
Well,
one that
I think Tim
I had a
Pool
terrible answer.
is
absolutely
his
when you
chat
asked me
is
about
being
it.
spammed by
And
Groypers
it was
right
because
now.
I think my approach.
I
to
wonder
it
if
was
his
too
audience would
surface-level
lean
cultural.
more
So the last
towards
time we had
like
Vaush on, when you asked me
destroying
about it, I
Charlie
couldn't give you a
Kirk
good answer.
than Vaush
And I
because
think
of that,
we
like
can
the
talk about
leanings
what's
of his
happening in
audience. I don't
schools,
know.
the things they're teaching.
I don't
children,
know.
And I don't know if either of you has an opinion and wants to start.
I wonder if he
with,
knows. I wonder if he's got an opinion
so
on
there
that.
are
He
two
must have considered
CRTs.
it.
There's the critical race theory that I know of, which is a highly esoteric essentially elective class that you can take in some law schools that teaches you a variety of incredibly eclectic legal theories that some of which I like and some of which I think I disagree with. And then there's the critical race theory that people like Christopher Rufo have been trying to push, a sort of catch-all term to describe all anti-racism. We see these anti-CRT bills being put through state legislators, and a lot of them don't even mention critical race theory. They mention stuff that's been boilerplate anti-racist theory for like 2 centuries. That stuff really concerns me. If I think that academia is to an extent sacred, of course, all the good things in our society now were born in the halls of academia. The Enlightenment, our democracy, the fair trial that we enjoy if we're arrested, these were things that were originally considered to be the crackpot initiatives of academics, and only through the respect of those ideas have we arrived at what we have today. So if there are problems within academia, I would have them solved in academia, not through the big hand of government reaching in and censoring everyone who says something that disagrees with some political party.
So a point of clarification, you don't believe that critical race theory is in schools?
I think that maybe there are ideas which overlap with critical race theory, but there's always going to be overlap between academic ideas. I mean,
got it.
You know, I drank water, so did Hitler, one of those type situations.
I think you're coming at it from in good faith, where you're technically correct here that the super academic way of defining critical race theory is not being taught to 4th graders, right? With that being
so, it'd be pretty.
With
tough
that
for
being
them.
said, there are. It's almost like saying, you know, we're not teaching advanced geometry to 4th graders, but we are teaching them, you know, very basic math, right? We'll get them the Euclidean geometry. So the very basics of this are definitely in schools, and there's many examples of this, right? The National Education Association literally came out in their press release and said that they are going to push for, and their word was critical race theory, just so we're clear. They use that term, right? That's not Christopher Rufo, that's not James Lindsay, who are good friends of mine. That's the National Education Association, right? And I think they might even be talking about something different than the Delgado theory of critical race theory, right? And so what I want to try to do here, Tim, is we can talk about critical race theory as an academic theory, or we could use a filler term like wokeism, which is more like racial justice, which I actually think would probably be...
Does he want to completely change the topic?
Can we go into my comfort zone, please?
There are probably 4-digit number of people in America who are studied on actual critical race theory, not including myself.
And I'm not even prepared to do that. But I'm happy to talk about racial
why
justice
did we
education
agree
and wokeism, which I think...
what the discourse is centered on.
Well, I think you guys actually agree, in essence, that the academic critical race theory there's overlap with a component in schools, but what we often hear is someone will say critical race theory is being taught to my kids, and then someone will say cite one author of critical race theory that we've brought up in school. And the issue is we refer to it as I believe it's called critical race practice.
The thing is,
this is something different than critical
the problem
race
is intersectionality has been part of anti-racist theory forever, but it's also a part of critical race theory. And so if intersectionality is somewhat taught in schools, they can say it's critical race theory, but that's something that's part of a bunch of other pieces of thought around racism as well. Like, for example, critical race theory hates racism, right? And that is also taught in schools. Does that mean not liking racism is critical race theory? There's just overlap. That's all it is.
Oh, that's all they want to do. It's just like the loosest connection possible.
Whereas stuff like anti-racist theory or structural racism maybe compel a little bit more thought when discussing.
But it's harder to connect anti-racism to
in principle,
the
I really
Frankfurt
disagree
School, like
but
Charlie
if you want
Kirk
to
was
talk,
doing.
I mean, we can call it wokeism if you want. That's probably a more accurate term.
I will just say, to the point about Christopher Rufo, white supremacist is also used as a catch-all term in the other direction.
If we're talking, I mean, in academia, the term white supremacist is virtually never used. It's sort of a common parlance.
What I will say, though, about to give credit to Christopher Rufo is that this is all kind of downstream from the conversation that Marcuse and Delgado started. It really is.
So let's talk about it then. But just one thing, though, since we're operating under the blanket wokeism, which is really broad term, let's talk about like specific ideas, because I'm sure there are some of them that I can provide a good defense for, and some of them I might
how about like
disagree with.
black-only dormitories?
Generally not a fan. I think that I don't think they're like explicitly harmful in the same way that traditional segregation is, but I also think that it incentivizes bad types of socialization, where the way that you get a reprieve from the faults of society is to find comfort in people of your own race. Maybe that incentivizes some bad stuff. In my university, we had safe spaces, but you know what they were? They were like chilled, like coffee break rooms behind like
Where'd you go?
Latin. I went to Humboldt State.
Okay.
And right behind there, and like anyone could go in there, whatever. Just the only thing that they asked was that you not be like a dick. But as long as you met that qualification, that was fine. That, to me, that's a good safe space. Maybe that works, you know?
So just happy to go through more.
Go for it, please. No, hit me.
I think this is actually really helpful. So how about reparations for slavery?
I think I'm pretty in favor of that, yeah.
Okay, make the argument.
It's just an owed debt. We said 40 acres and a mule. We never paid it. And unfortunately, the material reality for a lot of people who were slaves didn't change that much after they were emancipated. I mean, if you were a slave and you're made free, that's a big step up, don't get me wrong, but you have nothing. I mean, nothing. And because of the way generational wealth transfers from father to son or mother to anyone to their children, caught me there. Unfortunately, we still see the consequences of that borne out. You can actually look county by county. Where were slaves kept? Which were the plantation counties? And you see, this group of black neighborhoods, that's where they settled after slavery ended. It's like really immediate stuff, and it's a debt owed that this nation never paid.
I don't necessarily agree on reparations, but I think we need to clarify what that ultimately means. But I will say, I've long held the same
Vaush
position.
is knocking this out of the park.
There's
he
an
is
issue
doing so
of
well.
People who
I wonder if he would
enslaved,
like everything Charlie Kirk
released,
brings up if he just responds with
to actually
just
develop and grow.
opening line.
It's a general,
Well, that has nothing to do with
generational
CRT, but
wealth gap between people based on race.
Because both of those
for
things
historical
Kirk brought up
reasons.
had nothing to do with
The
CRT.
challenge I see, I suppose, is we've done a lot to amend the laws and change them. For instance, redlining and blockbusting have become illegal, and now we're dealing with an ultimately, I believe, is a class issue. Of course, racism still exists, but anyway, I digress on that point. What I wanted to get to is specifically on reparations. What do you view reparations as? More importantly,
so this is a big divide. Some people think like cash payments. I'm not a big fan of that. It doesn't fix the problem, for one. It's if you can put money into that community, but there's been research done on how long a dollar stays in a black neighborhood as opposed to a white neighborhood. And if a black neighborhood, all of the businesses are owned by corporate boards that are all majority white, eventually the money filters out and you get a very temporary boost in living situation, not much long-term structural change. I'm a big fan of structural reparations, not based on race, but rather based on targeting neighborhoods that need it the most. Some of these neighborhoods are like white, I passed through some of them on my way out from Ronald Reagan Airport. I can tell which parts of this country. You can see it in the bones of the neighborhood. And I think that a new proper reparations project, a new deal even, would go a long way. Get some
so you're saying not
there.
even based on race?
I think that we should recognize that this is largely a racial project because, unfortunately, poverty and race are really intertwined in this country. But in terms of applying it, I think that it would be much more healthy if we treated it like a collective effort to bring up the lowest sort of echelon of our economic.
So I want to ask you,
peers.
Charlie, would you agree with a program that was in how do I describe this? Explained as reparations, but was not based on race, went to people based on class and neighborhood, so that it could help Latinos and white people and Asians and everybody?
First of all, I'm against reparations. I just don't like the word because it kind of implies this intergenerational type guilt or allowance that I kind of reject, and I'm happy to build.
No one is asking
further.
you to feel guilty.
Do I agree that the question is mostly class?
Absolutely.
And I think that Vaush is hitting on something, and I think that you're saying that it's inherently racial. I really want to explore that with you because I think that's interesting. I think you're wrong, but I think that's interesting, where I think the racial thing is actually being used to distract people like you and I from actually talking about what's really happening here, which is a small group of people getting a lot richer while normal people get poor. And I think the racial thing is being used as this distraction tool to throw smokescreen in the middle while we're talking about something that we're never really going to have consensus on, when the true struggle right now is mainly economic.
Yeah, well, I think that applying reparations along racial lines runs into a bunch of really tough issues. Which neighborhoods? Do you go by like blood? Like, can you prove your great-great-grandfather was a slave? It gets very difficult very quickly. Maybe that would be the most direct interpretation of generational reparations. But in my mind, the reason why it's important to recognize the racial issue here is that the nature of class divides in this country is cut into racial policy prior to the Civil Rights Act. The redlining that took place, lines which still remain not in law but in practice, led to very distinct, sometimes, one side of the highway is nice and the other side of the highway, it legitimately
Can
looks
I just
like
jump in real quick?
Uh-huh.
I'm from Chicago. 47th Street was split by race. No joke. This has long-standing effects on the city. Just to point out.
Whoa. No, and I grew up in LA, and on either side of the 5, which cut through the city. I mean, or the 405. Sorry.
Let me
right
just
there.
interject something too, and I don't know if you're familiar.
I am nothing but impressed by Vaush. I have no commentary to add except just
from the south side of 47th. If we cross 47th, we would get arrested because the cops would pull up and say, "You don't live in this neighborhood. What are you doing here?"
I'm from the suburbs of Chicago.
That's
I've heard stories
well,
like
because
that.
housing discrimination is one of those things that is so
very
much
clear to
more
say I'm not
race-based
from
than
Chicago.
anything
I
else.
grew up in Beverly Hills, which is close though to West Hollywood and Koreatown, and the lines are clear as day. The reason I say that though about like the racial project is that because explicit discrimination is no longer in the law. We've pretty much wiped that out, with the exception of some, I guess, edge cases. The project of systemic racism, or the existence of systemic racism, is something which is carried through class by inertia. It isn't something you can explicitly legislate along anymore. I mean, obviously, nobody's out there passing laws like black people can't do this. That'd be silly. But instead, the consequences of slavery and of second-class citizenship for black people left unaddressed, a wound left to fester that unfortunately can't really heal itself inertially unless we do something specific.
So the issue with that argument is that the more that we intervened in the black community, it actually had the opposite effect. And Thomas Sowell probably has done the best research and literature on this. You can laugh all you want. He's got
I wasn't trying to besmirch.
He's a very thoughtful thinker, and he actually lived through this, right? He lived through the black renaissance in the 40s and the 50s, where redlining was a legitimate problem. So was yellowlining, by the way, against Italians and against Jews. Nowhere nearly as bad, but there were other degrees of discrimination based on ethnicity and cultural
it's really
background.
Underwhelming.
And the black community, especially, the area really well in the south of Chicago, near the Chicago stockyards, the black community almost had this rallying cry where they were being discriminated against everywhere, and they kind of collectivized their purchasing power, and they saw their incomes increase actually at a higher rate than white Americans in the 40s and 50s and early 60s. You've heard this argument many times, and you probably disagree with it, but it's just true, is that the moment that we all of a sudden de-emphasized fathers being in the home and subsidized fatherlessness, we saw all these other trends increase. So in right before the Civil Rights Act passed, about 24% of black children were born without a father. Now it's upwards of 70%. You guys can look at the Washington Examiner. It's 77%. Let's say it's 65%. So something has to explain that 40-point increase.
May I?
Yeah, just let me finish.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that America got more racist. It could be the cocaine thing, which, is a common issue. It could be, operations of all these things. But a 40-point increase, I would point to a culture of fatherlessness, really bad government-run public schools, and then subsidizing behavior that isn't good.
So there are a few things that I can agree with you on. First of all, having two people in your house to raise you is pretty much essential. You absolutely
Glad
need
we
to.
agree.
This is undeniable. While I don't believe in shaming single parents, even if their single-parentedness is a product of bad decision-making, it's still good. You need it's in this economy, one parent, honestly. Yeah. But with that being said,
it's not wrong.
There has been research shown
that
the rate of black fatherlessness is somewhat over-exaggerated, in large part because that number only applies to married fathers, so husbands raising their children. It turns out when you account for unmarried black couples taking care of their kids, the numbers actually rise to those just below white couples. I think there was an article on that. I don't know if I remember, saw it in Vice, but it tracks back to some really big study that was done back in 2016. So that's one point. But you are right. There are perverse incentives. For example, many welfare stipulations cut off with a shared income, which is only a few $1,000s per year higher than the necessary cutoff for the single income. Meaning that if you're a single mom, you can apply for the welfare.
Doing good by turning this narrative on its
head. Or otherwise file jointly, you go above the cap for welfare. This is a horribly designed program, undeniably, and it incentivizes bad, destructive behavior. The best thing that we can do, we restructure the welfare system in this country. Welfare is good for us. It is. I don't benefit from it. No, I don't think either of you benefit from it, I'm guessing. But we do collectively downstream from the increased economic potential of people who now have the money to afford daycare, proper childcare, get an education. In the long run, people in this country being richer enriches all of us. It's a mutual project. So we work on that. we find out what works and what doesn't, which welfare programs function, which don't, which types of economic revitalization function and which don't. And I legitimately believe that if we applied this country has the bones to be just a permanent economic beacon on the hill, just like a shining example to the rest of the world.
I agree with a lot of that. The bigger issue with the racial thing is that when you put some of these factors in even to present data, it doesn't pan out on racial lines, right? And this is where I think you'll agree, because you just said 2 parents in the home is a good thing, which we totally agree on. I think that's the ideal. Everything shows that is something that we should, push for.
3 parents maybe getting even better.
Oh yeah,
50%.
Yeah, polyamorous relationships.
Yeah,
not a fan.
Based.
But I will say that if you look at the data from the government, that a white child being raised
more parents
by a
are better,
single
right?
mother is less likely to succeed by 10 independently picked metrics than a black child being raised by a mother and a father. And so maybe it's less about the skin color and more about the removal of parents and specifically fathers in the homes. Now, if you want to talk about a domestic Marshall Plan to go put fathers back in the home regardless of skin color, I will sign up for that in a second.
With the right welfare, the right systems, I think people will tend to their own families.
But that would then all of a sudden de-emphasize what you said earlier, where it says it needs to be on racial lines, where I say, no, it needs to be on nuclear family lines.
Well, no, I think that the neighborhood revitalization should just be on like a sort of class assessment.
By the way,
I think
this
that
Friday, one of the hippy-dippy topics, should the nuclear family be preserved?
When it comes to poverty that involve the discussion of race.
That is a good question.
And there are some which do not. There are some types of poverty, some effects that are just ubiquitous and equally felt. But with regards to, say, the fact that they couldn't get loans to purchase homes for a very long time. I mean, there were people living who couldn't do this. The fact that they didn't benefit from the Marshall Plan, if I remember correctly, after World War II.
Well, Marshall Plan was Europe. You're talking about the GI Bill.
Oh, sorry, the GI Bill. My apologies.
Let me just point out all these white guys sitting here having a debate over the black community. Huh?
I just think that there is a lot of economic inequality. It's a lot of it's tied to race,
say that.
We don't need to turn this into
He's
some
so
weird
coy. It's really funny.
issue where we go
There's
tracking
no pressure
down every
on
black
him.
American
He's
and
just
holding
sitting
them
there
under a
raking in
microscope
money,
to see whether
really.
they get benefits.
Yep.
Now,
we just need to tend to our own.
This is where we kind of got off critical race theory very quickly.
I forgot about that.
I want to bring it back.
We're agreeing way too much, Tim.
All right.
No, because this is
Tim Pool.
This is one of the issues I see.
does Charlie keep-
right? You see these conversations around. I don't know how you describe it because it's a variety of things. Wokeism is typically a catch-all term for some kind of ideology that involves anti-racism, which involves critical race theory, critical race praxis. And
I don't like the wokeism thing because that's not the word that's being used, though. The word is being used as critical race theory. So that's what the discussion should be about, in my opinion.
Wokeism hasn't been smashing Google Trends for the last 6 months.
It was an anti-racist curriculum workbook where it asked it asked children why they thought that black children felt bad about their skin color. Now, I take issue with those things. They had another book where it was a little girl yelling at her mother saying, "You're lying to me about race." And then there was a whiteness contract with a devil tail coming out of it.
Okay, I saw that one.
Yeah, these are in schools.
Yeah, okay, so that the whiteness devil thing, I saw that. That's indefensible.
I read the book. The majority of it was fine. It had a few print pages. Like a few pages were like, oh, okay, I think this should maybe be taken out. And some version of the book, I think it actually was taken out.
It was a bunch of questions where it would ask you things like that and then ask you to answer. What have you done to make someone based on their skin color behave or whatever, and things of that nature?
I think these are conversations that are worth having. I wonder, with regards to what you're saying, do you know what grade level these were at?
I think she mentioned the woman. It was Asra.
Asra.
I think fourth grade.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
But I got to be honest, like the anti-racist one
grade.
Didn't have any pictures or anything. It was just questions, and I think she mentioned it was in a third grade. What was it called? What was the book called about the whiteness contract? The one you said was indefensible. That one was like a little girl who looked to be about like 8 years old. So
yeah, I saw that online.
Can I ask a question? Mm-hmm. So let's go to just piece,
yeah, sure.
issue by issue. Ibram X. Kendi, who's kind of one of the, archangels of the wokeism movement.
Beloved figure in the minds of conservatives and liberals alike.
So Ibram X. Kendi, and I'm paraphrasing, and you guys could pick up the quote, is that we need discrimination today because there was discrimination yesterday. That's the essence of the quote, right, Tim?
Yeah, he said the only solution for past discrimination is present discrimination, and the only solution for present discrimination is future discrimination.
So I find that to be reprehensible. What say you?
I think it's misguided in large part because I don't believe if there was some God who could just distribute all resources in a perfectly ordained way and did so at the snap of a finger, then maybe that would be a decent argument. In the real world, we have to go through politics, and any kind of discriminatory treatment under any circumstances, no matter how well intentioned, is going to have adverse effects. So with regard to what he said, there is a very charitable interpretation, and that charitable interpretation is discriminatory practices in the past necessitate favorable practices today, a way of bringing people up. My reparations argument, I mean, the poor in this country have always had it bad, at least worse than they could otherwise. That is essentially a version of that argument. Preferable treatment towards the poor. We do this with welfare because there are systemic barriers keeping them from full participation. Along racial lines, I don't even know what that would look like. I don't even know how that would lould look good. I'm not a big fan of affirmative
He wrote an
action.
amendment, right, called the Anti-Racist Amendment to the Constitution. It's not being considered anytime soon, where it would be preference.
You'll see, Biden will get it.
Yeah, based on skin color, that there would be some sort of accommodation based just by the melanin content in your skin.
There is one thing I want to say, though, and this is common in upper academia, and I know IDRIM sometimes gets brought into non-academic discussions, which I don't consider myself an academic, so I'm including myself in that. But sometimes I think these are fun to discuss, these ideas. What I noticed, at least in some of the classes that I took, the higher-end classes, was that sometimes when you were presented ideas, they were presented not.
This is
to
a
have
lot
you agree
more
with them,
cordial
but
than I
rather
thought it was going to be.
to
I thought it was going
incentivize
to be
the
yelling
greatest
fest.
discussion. For example,
I was expecting
yeah,
to be
Charlie
closer to
was
like
an
Hassan
economist, but I
versus
did learn about
Charlie,
Karl Marx.
where they
Now,
got
not
yelling
many
as hell.
professors are actual Marxists, unfortunately.
I guess like
so
all
when
that
Marx
media
was
trading
brought
paid
up
off.
in that context,
I guess
it
I
wasn't
think maybe
like,
one of the first
here's
bits
what
of
you
advice
need to
Charlie
know,
was giving
here's
was
what
just
you
to
can
like
believe.
say as little as possible
Here's some
Who knows?
and constantly remind the audience about how much they agree
what
on
do you
everything.
think about them?
Maybe.
And when I look at what Kendi has written,
Maybe he's trying to
Congratulate
attract
Vaush on how
Vaush's
civil the
audience and
discussion
less.
is.
agree with some of the more
Like maybe he's trying to
Yeah.
attract them. I
but
don't know.
enjoy the process.
I
And I
think
don't
he's
that's
just there
something
not
which
to
should
lose.
warrant the state intervening to cut out those discussions. I think that's a
That's a great
brutish response.
It's a great segue if I could go. So the next question then is, should we be teaching first and second and third graders to be hyper conscious aware of race all the time? I think that's destructive. I think it goes against the American promise of e pluribus unum, of caring more about character than skin color. And yes, Martin Luther King Jr. was a mixed bag when it came to this stuff.
He's a cool guy.
But he was a very radical socialist in some regard, but he really hit
what?
it perfectly when he said that this was the ideal.
Vaush just said
of
Martin
the
Luther
American
King's a cool
system.
guy, and he responds
Do you
he's a
see the
mixed
downsides of
bag.
getting 3-year-olds just carrying.
That's like that is a
caring
figure
about
in
the color
Americana
of the
that you
skin.
just don't
Well,
say that.
I think
No,
depending
even
on their
Trump like
environment, they're
praised.
not
Why would he?
already, whether they know
That
it
feels
or
like an
not.
optic
Very
nightmare. Why would he
specific
say
ways.
that?
We know from tests done, for example,
Yeah, because whenever he's in front of his own audience, he just
kids,
gets to
like
talk about
4
fucking
that some elements of
about the one quote.
Yeah, at least he
And now he knows
admits
some-
he knows that he'll hold him to account of like Martin Luther King quotes. So he'll say he's a mixed bag instead of like. At least we know now that Charlie Kirk thinks MLK is a mixed bag.
Conversations about those things can be valuable. I don't believe
bold
we live in a
statement.
colorblind world, so teaching people that we do can often lead them to remain ignorant to evident problems. Now, to what extent would you be comfortable? What would you say, like bringing a racial consciousness to third graders?
For me, very little to none. As don't care about it, de-emphasize it, look at the spirit, the soul, the conduct, and the character of the human being. Their skin color means nothing. Not saying that you should start to emphasize, organize what people look like, because therefore it means something that we're going to tell you. A great example is that this is the textbook definition of stereotyping, right? Is that if you see a black person, you don't know their history. You don't know if they're the son of a Nigerian billionaire. You don't know if they're an immigrant from Turks and Caicos, and you don't know if they're the 9th generation descendant of slaves, right? There's been 2 million blacks that have come to America legally through the immigration
There it is,
process since
blacks.
1980.
I have a counter.
So this
on
sort
my,
of hyper
yeah.
fixation on race.
Should I get
and
some
when I keep on
vodka
getting back
shots
to
out
this,
for
because
that?
I'm
I actually have a
serious,
counter I've been
is,
keeping for
do you
months of
think
how
this
many
is
times I hear
actually helpful
some conservatives
when-
use the term blacks.
when there
I think it's
actually
on
might
like
be stuff that
37 or
90% of
something.
the
I
country
forget.
agrees on. Do you think this actually might be a smokescreen tactic?
Well, it really depends on what's being taught. So here are some things I obviously don't want taught. One group is better than another, of course, Black people are like this, white people are like this.
That is
This
being
isn't-
taught in some schools.
There
just
are
so we're
some
clear.
schools that do that, and while I would look to see their curriculum mended, I don't. Again, I just don't want to implicitly agree with like a state ban. I would see adjustments done. But there are some things that I think could be done well. For example, say you're teaching about very basic early history,
This is where I wanted to get to.
Yeah,
This
okay.
is important.
So here are some things about America's founding that I like. One of the first practical liberal democracies, glory of the republic. Folks had nice hair back then. I
Not a
don't know.
democracy, but a republic.
Right.
That's
Well,
okay.
I mean, they're not mutually exclusive.
Just
and
said
we,
republic.
of course, did more to fulfill
Yeah.
the promise of a democracy with time. But obviously, when America was founded, it was a slave state.
I really want Charlie Kirk to talk about
1 in every 6
ancient Greece.
people in America at that time
When he
was
name drops
human
philosophers
property.
Can I
and
ask you a
shit, that's
question?
like my
Sure.
favorite
How many
Charlie Kirk.
states had abolished slavery by the time the Constitution is ratified?
Well, I don't know the exact number.
9 out
But
of
I imagine-
13. That's not a slave country.
Well, then you could say it was a confederacy.
still is.
with
It allows
portions that were
slavery.
slave
I think that's
states.
better said. 9 out of 13 had
And
already
then
abolished.
slavery
There was a-
grew. It
there was a
continued to
sunset
grow
moratorium
past
for
that.
slavery in the Constitution.
So this could.
Vermont abolished slavery in 1777. We were on the way to eradication. We were not a slave country.
Well, hold on. I mean,
then we
and
went away
were-
from
we were
eradication,
on
had
the
to go into
way, but
war
then,
to
like,
stop it. What?
80 years later, it was still happening.
So the question is why, right? That's a really important question. And the
Economics, I
well,
imagine.
yeah. So Cotton Gin and John C. Calhoun.
well,
Happy
hold
to
on.
go through that. But yeah,
There was actually a
That's
a
1776
grievance in the Declaration of
commission shit.
Independence.
This is a
specifically that
weird
the Crown
statement.
had enslaved people.
the first draft.
Because
in the
it
first
would need
draft
a
from Thomas
federal
Jefferson. The
ban
Crown
on
had enslaved
slavery
people
for it
who had
not to
done
be a
nothing
slave
to offend
country.
the Crown.
Like if I
and then
allowed murder in
at
4
were then
states
offering
and there was
them
no
freedom
federal
to
ban
show
against
them to wage
murder
war
and a bunch of
against
states allowed
colonists
it,
who
that
had
would be a
raised
murder
them.
country
Yeah.
because there's no ban on murder federally. There's no federal ban on slavery.
Jefferson took that out, and he did it because they felt, and this is according to historians, that without, I think it was South Carolina and Georgia, they would not have been able to win the Revolutionary War, and so they had to remove that,
That's exactly
hoping
right.
they would stay in. Now, the reality is, I'll just say one more point. They
Yeah,
thought
so
they
they
were gonna lose
compromised
anyway.
on slavery.
They really did. They didn't think they could go up against the greatest empire in the world at the time. So it's kind of unfortunate, I think. An important factor here is that I believe it was the British
I don't know if I would
Empire.
call slavery
actually,
unfortunate,
1833
but
had
sure,
abolished
it is.
slavery in all of
They
its
always
territories,
talk about it in
and it
that
took
way.
the U.S. a little bit longer to do so.
It's a
I
little
wanna make
stinky.
stress, this issue for the start of the country was
Rough patch.
contentious and ultimately led to violence because from the beginning, as Charlie pointed out, most of the states had already abolished this, so it was like people were ready to fight from the beginning.
Oh, I just want to say to that, my understanding of the founding of America isn't as simplistic as the founding fathers were evil because X or Y. I recognize, of course, that
And I appreciate that.
there are incredible complexities to those issues. And also, I'm not a historian. There are probably tons of things out there I don't even know that might change my opinion in the future. But with that being said, while I recognize there were fine-bodied, hearted, and souled Americans who recognized slavery was a moral aberration from the get-go, 1 in every 6 Americans was owned. And while that may have been constrained to some of the states, it was still ultimately
Isn't
under
this
the
because a
purview
lot of the
federal
states
government
that
to make
abolished
decisions with
slavery were
regards to the legality
gradually
and
abolishing
constitution?
slavery? Like there were
Now,
still slaves in
some
those
people
9,
they get really
13
defensive
states.
when
Wasn't
this
that the case?
conversation comes. I'm
The
not saying
problem
this, but
with
certain
like this
declarations.
idea
And
that he's proposing
I think it's because they
is that it wasn't that we were going towards the gradual abolition of slavery. We went in the other direction. Slavery expanded, and they were afraid because the abolitionist movement started to pick up some steam in like the 1840s and 50s and 60s. And with the election of Abraham Lincoln, that's when we saw the secessionist movement and boom, Civil War. So slavery expanded westward, and there was conflict in states like Bleeding Kansas over people literally shooting each other over whether slavery was going to be instituted in the state. So it expanded.
It doesn't encourage discrimination. It just encourages a base awareness of some serious problems.
So, but that's not happening, right? Is that largely what we're seeing through school districts like Chicago?
1 second, I'm going to mute it for another 5 seconds because people told me to shut up just to annoy them.
Yeah,
If you don't want me to talk, then we'll watch it somewhere else. Go watch it on Tim Pool's. Oh wait, you don't want to watch it on Tim Pool's. Ah.
Nuance and complexity that you just presented, right? Where let me just say this, is that part of the kind of archangel triumphant of the wokeism coalition is Nicole Hannah-Jones, Robin DiAngelo, and Ibram X. Kendi. And Nicole Hannah-Jones in particular, right, the author of the 1619 Project, she heretically says that America was founded on slavery, right? And so
I'd be okay with that.
But it's just not true.
It depends on what you mean by founded on.
She defines this. She says the founding fathers were in favor of it. Not true. George Washington wasn't. John Adams wasn't. John Quincy Adams wasn't. Thomas Jefferson even signed a moratorium of new slaves coming into the United States. Ben Franklin chaired an anti-slavery convention in 1775. None of these guys were writing expositionally how wonderful slavery.
Well, this isn't
I don't
being
think
taught to
Vaush
third graders,
actually
right? The 1619 Project's a little
large,
New York op-ed.
Yeah.
No, it's
Yeah.
not.
John
See,
American
that's
history,
where
I
you're
don't think he
wrong.
does.
He never
The
talks about this
1619
side of
Project's
things
being
in detail.
implemented
No,
as
he
school
doesn't.
district
Doesn't know how to
curriculum in
combat this.
thousands of school districts across the
So
country.
That's
seen-
true.
well,
Across the country.
It's not just like a podcast. This is curriculum.
Right, there are principles of the 1619 Project that I think are defensible. For first of all, we as Americans tend to think of the founding of our country as its legal founding, you know? But the legal founding of the United States didn't really mean much for a slave. I mean, it really didn't matter that much for the peasantry of the time, no matter what.
See, that's where I disagree. Because so when was the first state to abolish slavery? Vermont in 1777. Why?
Well, I mean, for the
because
slaves
they were
who lived
inspired by the Declaration of Independence. Things
Charlie's
started to
so proud
change
of
in
this.
that year.
Right, but the slaves that then continued to be slaves would have been in the states that didn't make that choice, right?
Which
I mean,
were
they would have been
largely in southern states.
So,
And-
yeah. Well, that's what I mean. I didn't mean to miss out on the particulars there. The only point that I'm making is that depending on whose lineage you follow, depending on the narrative that you tell, this is a very postmodern idea. And I would like to consider myself charitable to postmodernism, the idea that there are many ways you can describe the human experience, which I think we all believe to some extent. Depending on who you follow, you get very different ideas on what America is, when America was founded, not in a legal sense, but in a conceptual sense, and who today holds the birthrights to which they were entitled. And these conversations should be had. They're worthwhile conversations to have. I've seen some of the curriculums in these schools. I find some of them a little bit objectionable. But to be perfectly clear, I've found school curriculums objectionable for ages. About half of Americans believe in the lost cause myth, the idea that the North started the a civil war and it was over like states' rights or whatever. That's believed by a large number of Americans. There are textbooks put out by Pearson in Texas that have
there is
narratives
some
in them
truth
that
to
are,
that. By the way.
Oh, no, you
Yes,
did
it is
it.
I'm happy to go
You
through
bit
Civil
the
War
bullet.
history.
Well, let me-
on
let me-
that, but yeah.
I just want to say I have long had problems with many of the ways children
And
are
the
taught
problem is
concepts
he's
in this
so
country.
unbelievably
None
wrong,
of
but I
them
don't
have
know
made me
if
want to get my
Vaush
state
has the tools to
legislators
deal with
just
this.
outright ban all of these ideas.
Well, so let me
Please,
I'll make 2
I could
points.
talk
this
about
was-
that
this
all
was
day.
Charlie's
1619
fucking
project
baby as
is,
well, wasn't it?
Schools,
1776
Newsweek
was his
reports
baby.
U.S. schools have openly taught the 1619 project for months.
What I'm going to
This
do
back
is
in
pause
September.
it so people don't get too angry. If you go and you look at each state's secession statements, multiple are literally like, we're doing this for slavery. If you look at the president of the Confederacy, he said, this is for slavery. You look at the battle flag of the Confederacy, the white part of it, you see like the Confederate flag, that's actually in the corner of the flag. The rest of it's white and has red at the bottom. That's the white man's war and the blood of those martyred in the white man's war. It was a war over slavery. It was states' rights to do what? Own slaves.
We've got Education Next. The 1619 Project enters classrooms. We have the Pulitzer Center, the 1619 Project curriculum. Here you will find resources for teaching 1619 in your schools. And I don't know if I have one more source. Right? Then we move to the.
Do they read the full thing in class? That's crazy. It's pretty dense reading, you know.
They
It
do
is.
They do it.
And then lawmakers push to ban 1619 from schools. So it's there. It is.
And so let me tell you why people like myself are pushing for the bans of the 1619 project. Is that first of all, it's just not true. It is not even charitably, in the most charitable reading, to use a word that you used, even remotely fair to the ethos or the founding of the country. It doesn't go to original source documents. It doesn't go to quotations, and it meanders through generalizations and very heavy emphasis on emotion.
Can I ask something though, really
Sure,
quick?
go ahead.
Is this not being presented as an alternate perspective as
Yes.
opposed to replacing
Yeah,
the
thank
entirety
God.
of our curriculum?
No, it is. And this is an important thing, which is what is education, right? So is education where we're supposed to, for 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and 6th graders, open up every single bad idea that's ever been discovered and have kids
It's
choose?
not a bad
or are
idea.
we
A
trying
lot of
to
it was
lead
completely
them towards
legitimate.
something?
Some of it wasn't.
Lead them towards having better developed
Yeah,
character.
we
Lead
get
them
to help
towards trying to
Freud
find
in
objective
schools.
truth.
Like at the age of 16,
More.
we were talking
wanna
about
make
Freud,
them
the good
more.
and the bad.
I agree. And
True.
so the question is, what is good? What is evil? Well, we don't know. A line is crooked unless we have a straight line to
about
compare
George
it to.
Washington,
you
he
know
had
what
some
I
good
think on
things
this,
and some
don't you?
bad things.
I actually don't.
The narrative we've told about
Here's a famous thing. His teeth was not wooden. They say that to make it cute. It's actually made of slaves' teeth. His teeth were slaves' teeth, actually.
founding of this country has for a long time been deeply whitewashed. We talk about the founding fathers like they're heroes, and there is heroism in their lives, no denying that. And we often gloss over many of the horrors of this country. There are things that we've done, for example, that we would use as an incentive to forever despise other countries that nobody's even taught about. Like one I read recently, for example, was that we did mass chemical bathings, and I believe it was sterilizations of Hispanic people at the beginning of the 20th century, moving up past the southern border, because there were like these militias forming in towns near the border. And they just did it because they had the de facto support of the local government as a way of discouraging their movement up. Now, the numbers involved in that are significant. And I feel like, well, that's maybe not great for 4th graders. there could be more work done to talk about the faults with this country, in addition to eulogizing its
the question is, what's the
leaders.
goal, though, right? Is the goal to try to have young people graduate by the time of high school to be skeptical, apprehensive, and not very proud of the country, or eventually tell a true and patriotic story where you have people graduating that are thankful and have gratitude? That's the purpose of education when it comes through.
Gratitude is not the purpose of education.
Well, I think gratitude's a moral necessity.
No, you should be grateful for the people in your life, but I will never be grateful to the state. I'm not that much of a collectivist.
Well, not a state. Are you not thankful that you live in America?
I'm thankful of the things that make my life easier. I was born white to well-off parents, and today I enjoy many of the benefits of having really responsible and attentive parents.
Are you thankful you have constitutional rights that are protected by government, given to you by
It
God?
should be an
But do you know
easy
how
yes.
those constitutional rights came about? They were fought for by whiny bitches like me who were never satisfied with what they were already
They
given.
were granted by God, protected in the Constitution.
They were fought
in
for by
1789.
whiny,
self-serving,
same as
but
the
what
14th
Vaush
and
is saying
15th
is
Amendments,
correct.
everything that's come since.
Yeah,
we
Charlie
fought
could have
for
just
them, and
stuck
it
on the
is
historical
discontentedness
facts.
Are you
that
thankful
leads
for
us
those
to
Yeah,
fight.
he really
He
should
lost
have.
I'm
a lot
thankful
of
for
ground
This is a
them.
bad
here.
move.
As
by
am
him.
I for
He's
the-
doing
There's some
okay.
gratitude.
Sure, I'm grateful to them, but patriotism, I'm grateful to what people in America do. But America's a concept. It's been used to do a lot of good and a lot of harm.
It's a home.
Well, a home can be I mean, in the
It's not a
broadest sense,
concept,
but I know
it's
what
a
my
home.
is.
Fuck
I know
off.
where my
Wow,
family
that
lives,
sounds like
and
a
I'm
mug.
loyal to them.
America
when it
is
comes
a
to this
home.
country,
It's
not a home, Charlie.
Live,
It's
laugh,
a
political
love.
and economic bloc, and I have only one concern, and it's that the people in this country live the best lives possible. Also outside the country, but I live here. This is my backyard, and when I want people graduating, from high school, I don't want them to feel this sense of contentedness. Contentedness is the death of activism for all that's good, and activists have always been. You're an activist in your own way, as am I, have always been the forerunners for good.
They've done a lot of damage, too.
Sure, they have, but we make the world move. And I want to get kids interested in the flaws in this country because that teaches them to grow up and care about them so hard they fix them.
This is a great piece of disagreement. We have clarity, not agreement, which is obviously what we want, where I think that we should try to be developing and graduating kids with strong character that want to appreciate and protect a country and to try to be active against forces that wish to deconstruct it. Your goal, and we're just not going to persuade each other, is that you want to try to graduate activists that know the flaws and are willing to mobilize to try to fix them or to undo whatever system might be effectuating. Is that fair?
As long as it's responsible and effective, yeah. There are ways to do progressive. Of course, I'm a progressive, so I'll say it's good by default, but there are ways to do it poorly. I disagree with people on the left constantly, either over issues of actual concept or issues of optics or issues of engagement. I always find something to disagree with people on. It's very fun living. But with all that being said, I have to wonder, is it not the prerogative, and I'm not assigning this to you, of tyrants to make sure that the children who graduate from their schools find no fault in the nations they're taught to love?
See, I never said no fault, but you could be thankful for something, and you can have a holistic view of something and understand that there were stumbles and there were missteps, while also being pretty freaking proud of that something. How exceptional this project
What
is.
if there are current problems, like today,
We should talk about those. Like we already talked about fatherlessness, government overreach. Tim, you want to interject?
Oh, no, I think it's interesting to me. You're from the suburbs of Chicago. You grew up in Beverly Hills. Somebody commented, I think it was on Twitter, they said that when they went to school, they weren't taught about Black Wall Street or the Tulsa bombings and things like that. And that's proof, or that shows that our schools are not teaching. And I was like, I was taught all those things. In Chicago. We were taught about the Trail of Tears. We were taught about westward expansion. We were taught about the violation of treaties.
I was taught a lot as well.
Yeah, we were taught a lot about that.
When we learn history, what we're really
Tim went to
learning
private
is
school,
is a
by the way.
story.
That's
I think
why
it's
he was
called
taught that.
historiography. Obviously, when we're just looking at the facts of history, I mean, what is it? Data and sheets, wrote transcriptions of things people have said. Nobody teaches that. You teach the story. And the story we've told for a long time has bowled over a lot of problems I think we should work to fix. Do we want people to be thankful? Sure. I don't want to.
So we agree on that. Good.
I don't want to stop teaching kids that there are undeniable things they should be happy for. For example, every day that I worked before I was a YouTuber, I thanked union activists back during the turn of the 20th century who gave us the 5-day work week, the 40-hour work week, who ensured that we had proper standards for lunch breaks and what have you in this. And they fought and they were whiny, and I'm sure a lot of them had really bad ideas besides the worker activism. But we all benefited from that.
Do you ever think that as an activist, as a progressive, a libertarian socialist, is there ever a point where the activism actually does much more harm than good, and the preservation of what already exists actually should be desirable?
I would say that's the case with black separatists. There are some people in this country, not all of them are black, of course, but who believe that the racial problems...
He really needs to emphasize here that they're not a significant amount of people, and it's very, very rare.
Or at the very least to form separate enclaves within this country.
And that's nothing new, just so you know.
I don't think
it's very old.
I think that's. I don't think that's what Charlie asked. He asked you if there. Do you want to rephrase?
Yeah. So.
Sorry if I misunderstood.
No, well, you were in the general area, but I guess the question is a heavy emphasis on activism for activism's sake, mobilizing for grievances. What if actually what we have as a constitutional order is actually pretty awesome?
Let me
feels
ask,
like
do you think
Charlie
there
is
are
beating around the
things
bush,
worth,
just saying like
that systems in place
some
in the United
status
States
quos
that
are good,
worth defending?
That's a better way to word it.
Yes. Do you believe that there are systems in place in the United States that we
I
should
wonder
defend
what
and preserve?
historical
Yeah,
piece of
for sure.
progressive activism,
I mean,
like big historical progressive movement, made things worse.
Yeah, I would actually be interested in hearing about that. Like, if I was Vaush, I would ask for like him to name one, to give me an idea of his question.
There are ideas. For example, the concept of democracy, the concept of fair
He'd probably end up saying something like communism, maybe.
But not in America.
Yeah.
Like, specifically in America.
representation, the idea that anybody could have a chance if they make it here. These are ideas that I think are almost sacrosanct. I mean, I think they're almost existentially worthwhile. Now, to what extent does this country live up to those promises? In some ways, it does so better than most other countries, sometimes any other country. In other ways, it could do better. Income mobility here, which is the measure for how effectively this country manages its meritocratic
Chat,
system.
I said progressive movement in America, you dumb fucks.
Here.
Sorry.
The idea remains valuable to me, but I can't help but think maybe we could make it better. If making it better entails some highly destructive process that involves tearing down everything we've ever known and such, then, I mean, eventually you have to do a risk.
The eugenics movement. That would actually be a good one.
Yeah,
that's actually a good suggestion.
I did say, were they a progressive movement?
Well, no. But well, yeah, that's true. But I think that would be actually a good example of activists who actually did harm.
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Schoolward benefit, right?
So what I'm trying to caution you about is that the people pushing CRT or wokeism, they don't have the same sort of nuance that you do. These are revolutionaries that want to tear down the system.
But I am as well. I just think that everything has its time.
You just had kind of a little bit more of a moderated answer.
But how often do actual critical race theorists come on like all of the talk show circuits that end up? I mean, we've had some. I mean, Joy Reid advocated for it, but the actual scholars.
They're running Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. They're running the United States military.
They're not doing. No, they're not. No, they're not running these places.
Wokeism.
No, you mean no. With Robin DiAngelo.
Robin DiAngelo is not running Lockheed Martin.
Right. I'm not a big fan of her largely because I think her language incites a lot of negative discourse. I think that it's bad for publication. Maybe good in an academic setting.
So not good to teach generals that.
Like for some random people at like a business? Absolutely not. No.
Generals in the military.
Oh, yeah, sure. No.
Because that's what's happening.
Well, the big problem that I have, but keep in mind, that's not wokeists running these things. What happens is this, and put pretty simply, the majority of Americans broadly are progressive on these issues.
By the way,
support BLM.
I would be fine with generals learning it. I disagree with Vaush. Generals are supposed to be academically inclined and extremely intelligent, and I would hope they would be able to decode something like that in the type of setting. Or we should have extremely intelligent generals who just don't go pew pew shooting gunny at enemy.
All these sort of broad cultural markers. So corporations and other large entities think we need to avoid a cancellation. We need to appeal to the business interests of this country. We need to do something to ingratiate ourselves to the majority opinion. So oftentimes, and they've done this for decades, by the way, is they find some consultants, they pay them $300,000.
Like Robin DiAngelo.
To come on over there, and Robin DiAngelo's job, first and foremost, is to convince everyone who hires her that she was worth that money. So is she going to come over there and write like a PowerPoint like, don't be racist, like, come on, be cool. No, she has to go all out. And what you get are these cringy, like the Coca-Cola PowerPoint, where you get, look, some of the things there are defensible. Does systemic racism exist? Sure. Should we be aware of the concept of like implicit bias? Yeah, fine. That's good. That's just normal human things, I think. But some of the language in there really made it seem like she wanted white people to feel a little bit bad. And I don't want white people to feel bad. I don't want anyone to feel guilty over who they are.
What percentage of this country do you think supports Black Lives Matter?
Well, I know that at its peak after George Floyd's murder, it was something like 71%. I think since then it's trended downwards. Is it gone below 50?
Yes. And,
wow.
well, it depends on where you go. I use Civics. They have 237,458 responses from April 1st, 2018 to August 2nd, 2021.
Wait.
I think they do a pretty good job, but there's always a challenge.
Wait,
with
what?
polls and whether they
He said it went down 50. It's at 53. What is he saying? He said it went below 50. It didn't. It's at 53%.
Tim.
He has the source in front of him. How did he say it wrong?
Tim.
It says 53 right there. This is his source. His own source isn't even below 50%.
Let him spin it. He's going to spin it. He must. He must try.
I'm excited. Vaush has to catch him on this. Well, maybe he can't see it. I hope he can.
You know, their system. The peak support was 53% after the death of George Floyd.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
This is a graph. Okay. I see. This is in May. Okay, so it goes there. Okay. I see you, Tim.
And opposition actually declined fairly steadily. There was no major spike in opposition. There was a major spike in support after the death of George Floyd. However, there was a rapid escalation of opposition. According to Civics, current support...
Wait. I think it's important
This is
to mention.
registered voters, isn't it?
Yeah, this is important to message. But look at this. Even his own source, it's still important here. More support than oppose it. So a plurality of Americans still support Black Lives Matter.
For Black Lives Matter is 45% and opposition is 42%.
Those numbers are really different from what I might have looked at Pew Research. I couldn't tell about the methodology, which is more valid.
Well, and it's
course.
actually
So that means okay.
CRT.
So what this means is even the one source that is the most like America hate Black Lives Matter, even in that source, more Americans support than oppose Black Lives Matter.
Word is very unpopular. So I would look at it differently. I think these corporations have been infiltrated by highly motivated activists, which you said the education system, the goal should be to create activists that have really bad ideas. And I think they're putting America on a trajectory that I think you are even concerned about. Because you said that there are some sacrosanct ideas, right? The sacrosanct ideas are general fair representation. Wokeism does not believe in that.
Well, no, that's not true. I would say, I don't know what you mean by wokeism, but I think that there are plenty of progressives.
You defined it, which is that kind
No,
of idea.
you didn't. Wokeism is a made-up fucking word that you just made up on the spot. So now this is basically exactly what Mark Ruffalo wanted it to be a catch-all term.
Of judging people based on skin color, discrimination.
I would say that what I've advocated for represents the supermajority of progressive opinions, and what we're largely seeing is a couple of really bad examples being brought to the limelight because they're most objectionable.
Sure. To be fair, though, I mean, you might have these...
Keep saying Mark Ruffalo. Sorry, wrong Mark.
Very, very well thought out views of things. You could say, oh, that's indefensible. Of course, I don't want to be unreasonable. But when you get Mark Milley coming out and talking about white rage as a blanket...
I thought his speech was lovely. It reminded me of those old Chinese philosopher generals.
But you have people quitting the military over this stuff because they feel like they're... I've actually spoken with people who retired because they've...
Okay, it's Chris Ruffalo. Okay, chat, stop bullying me. This is mean. Okay, bully the British person. That's why he's here.
They've been discriminated against on racial lines they don't like. And one guy I met said he was planning a lifelong career in the military and immediately got out because they implemented these policies of white racial trainings. They were told that the symbols of America are no longer allowed to be displayed in private because they're extremists.
In the military?
In the military,
okay,
yes.
Well, I can't speak to any of that.
Can I be honest? Sounds kind of like a pussy. If you join the military and you're going to be able to take sniper fire and you can't take some racial sensitivity training, you kind of sound like a pussy.
I don't know about you, but isn't it the case in it's the case in the UK that although they keep on publishing stories about how much they hate racial implicit bias training, in my country it's been on its way out for the last 5 years. Most corporations don't use it anymore. I wonder if that's true in America as well.
I'm not aware, but I think they still do use it. But I also don't believe. I just flat out will say I don't believe, and someone would have to prove it to me, that they're banning symbols of America in the military. That sounds like nonsense to me.
That the only thing I want to say is that it feels like with Robin DiAngelo, we've seen this pattern for decades now. I don't think it has anything to do with infiltration. I think it's the big ups, the CEOs, the project managers, whatever. They know there's some broader political, social, cultural trend happening, and they think who's someone we could get? And if you look up racial sensitivity training on Google or anywhere else, some names are going to pop up, and we know which one comes up first, and they just hire that person because they've got money and they need to spend it before the end of the quarter so their budget doesn't get cut.
Do you think that it should be... How's the right way to phrase this? If a corporation were to tell, say, white employees that they had inherent characteristics based on their race, or that they should undergo some kind of course or class based on their race, should businesses be allowed to do that?
You mean legally or like morally?
Both. You know.
I suppose legally if they want to. I can understand people being upset over it. I don't think there's anything wrong with racial sensitivity training and concept. The problem is that it's almost always done by this consultant class of like upper middle class, like WASPs who are really, really intent on getting their own milquetoast veil of progressivism pushed down the throats of whoever they can have paid to listen to them. If it's a good course, everyone should be able to hear it.
Wouldn't that violate the Civil Rights Act, though?
It might. I guess that I would defer entirely to law. If it turns out to be unconstitutional, then he had it. I just want to say, though, that while we are fixating on bad behaviors here, and there's nothing wrong with that, I do maintain my insistence that I think the vast majority of progressives would agree with what I have to say. Though, keep in mind, there are always going to be a mix of good and bad ideas.
When we debate in Coconut Island.
Even the Civil Rights Act, or the Civil Rights Movement, which we all know and love today, can't deny it. There were plenty of people acting there whose ideas
Charlie's face is smaller, he gets less coconut.
Separatist face, though he amended that before he died. There are even ideas of Martin
How would
Luther
it
King
fit? How would he fit one in his
Maybe it
mouth?
would be tighter.
If I spoke to him.
Okay,
He wrote a
no,
book
let's stop.
After the Civil Rights Act, where do we go from here? Chaos or something good. And he said a lot of stuff about the responsibility for white people to not make amends, but to educate themselves on the experience of black suffering so that we no longer just integrate. We truly assimilate. We know we're a collective bond. There's always going to be some disagreement. Is the movement valid? To me, a movement which recognizes the racial discrimination, the systemic racism that exists, that there are problems we have yet to overcome, this is a movement worth defending.
I just want to make some data points real quick, and then Charlie, you can come in. Man. So first, the one thing I wanted to highlight, let me actually pull this up, is that net support, which is support versus opposition, before George Floyd died for Black Lives Matter in this country was 16% net support. As of today, according to Civics, it's 3%. That brings it all the way back to 2018, to August 16th. Now, one of the things I think is really important to note is...
Okay, I just want to say, so a majority of Americans still support it, or it still has net support, so it's still net positive plurality. That's number one. And that's his data. So that means the data that he's picked, which is not the most positive data for Black Lives Matter, let's be clear. And let me also say, polling data does not decide if a movement is in the right or wrong, because the Freedom Riders had 20% support during their campaign during the Civil Rights Movement. The majority of Americans said that MLK's movement, when he first started, was hurting, not helping. So I gotta be honest, it's not that simple. It's just because of some polling data came out. It could say 90% opposed, and that wouldn't dictate if they're right or wrong or not.
That poll on MLK especially, even just before he died, wasn't it still the case that most white Americans had a negative view of him?
I don't know. I would have to check, but definitely during a very long portion during his movement. Basically, it's to say that polling data, or just because you have polls that say most Americans think this, that doesn't indicate that it's the right or wrong thing to do. I mean, everybody knows of my deep opposition to the death penalty, and of course, still not the vast majority, but a slim majority of Americans support the death penalty.
Just because, actually, I do agree with that. But just to stress the scale, there's a Harris poll in 1968, and MLK's public disapproval rating was nearly 75%.
And he was killed, what year was it?
68.
He was killed 68, right? Damn.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it actually, can I be honest? I think if MLK was not assassinated, that he would be more a target of more Republican ire today.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely since he was launching his anti-poverty campaign around the same time. I think it's almost undoubtedly true. And I think we can see right now, because even when put in a position, Charlie Kirk had to admit here, he's a quote-unquote mixed bag. I don't want to fall too far behind, but you have one last thing you wanted to say?
Yeah, because as soon as these people die, you get to make them into the pacified, fucking meat off version that you want them to be, and it's just but that's just the fact that conservatives will just oppose change until it happens. And then they'll pretend they were on the side of change all along, and then just go after whatever new thing comes.
Look what's happening with gay marriage right now. Like we're seeing Republicans like flip when they have the opportunity.
Just as soon as they can, yeah.
Severe tribalism and hyperpolarization in this country. So if we look at support for Black Lives Matter among Democrats, 86%. Support or opposition for Black Lives Matter among Republicans, 86%. Opposition, mirror image. You take a look at independents.
We're more alike than we may think, huh?
Right. You take a look at the independents, though, people who don't align, and I would say, what is the date around May 1st, there was an inversion. And now the majority of independents oppose Black Lives Matter, 44% to 39%.
That's not surprising to me, given that there's been very little in the way of optical. I'm sorry, you haven't spoken in a while. I apologize.
No,
I just wanted to make those data points just to clarify some things.
I wanted this to be more of a discussion than a debate, so I think it's actually really helpful. Are you concerned when certain judges or people running for DA say that accommodations on sentencing should be made on race? Does that bother you?
Who said that? I've never heard that before.
Well, people in law schools have been saying it.
I mean, students have always
Kim
been...
Fox in Chicago has heavily implied that communities of color need to be accommodated for in sentencing. And they've all but done this by just getting rid of the bail laws that we've seen altogether, right? I Decriminalizing shoplifting, all that, please.
Oh, I'm totally okay with that. We lock way too many people up, just flat out. That's not even...
So like murder out the next day?
No, not murder. You said shoplifting.
Well, I'm just saying, just the bail reform laws in New Mexico and California have been
my God, the
disastrous.
slippery slope fallacy on fucking...
Here's actually a really great point. It's a tough one for me. I agree. I think we lock way too many people up. I err on the side of liberty, innocent until proven guilty. To take a working class individual who is accused of shoplifting before he's even been proven of guilt, lock him up for several months, he loses his job. However, what do we see in San Francisco? Mm-hmm. Wave of shoplifting, businesses shutting down, because when you don't stop the crime, you get, I guess, a lot of crime.
Yeah,
it's a tough issue. I wanted to let you guys.
I think we'll totally disagree on this. You first.
Maybe. Well, I've read a lot on recidivism. We have a fairly high recidivism rate in this country because really the thing that causes crime more than anything else, it's not actually poverty, it's income inequality. When poor people and rich people share the same space, it leads to a lot of problems. All poor people together in a neighborhood, what is there to steal? Poor people and rich people together in a neighborhood. There you go. You have very clean targets. And what's more, there are other forms of criminality that only really fully express themselves in the types of neighborhoods that have a really strong mix of wealthy and poor. I could see that because, again, from where I grew up, I lived on the border of a lot of low-income communities. Now, Beverly Hills, safest place you could be. 3 a.m., you want to take a jog, go for it. Seriously.
Not anymore.
Maybe. Oh, I haven't been there in like 5 years.
You'd be surprised, man.
I'll say this.
Good luck walking Rodeo Drive now.
Well, okay, Hurston, I don't want to walk Rodeo Drive during the daylight, okay?
Well, I agree.
I agree.
After Garcon has had his work in L.A., it's a disaster.
Violent crime is down since the 90s. We've had a bit of an up since COVID.
It's up massive in the last year.
Oh, well, COVID's led to a lot of really weird exigent factors. But
defunding the police.
We haven't defunded the police anyway.
No, we haven't defunded the police, number one,
Yeah,
and we have no clue that we have no evidence that that's correlative. No evidence. Zero evidence.
260 departments, I think it was reported last year, had stripped their funding from
Sorry,
departments.
when you said defund, I thought I meant like the anarchist vision of like community policing. When it comes to police funds being stripped,
somebody in chat just said COVID has led to higher crimes lows. You do know that like just the people, like just the heat can like add to higher crime. There's a lot of weird things that can make people actually like make it more statistically likely that crime occurs. Like, yeah, I mean, the idea that an economic recession compounded from a global pandemic that kills 100,000 Americans might put people in a desperate position where they might have to go to a criminal lifestyle. I mean, right now we're talking about this eviction moratorium where 1 in 6 renters might lose their home. I mean, it's not that crazy to think that that might be something that increases violent crime.
To be had about the relationship between that and crime, but the crime increase seems to be all countrywide, so I don't know if I'd be leaning more towards that being a COVID thing and people being restless and angry and, I don't know, aggressive. The thing that I'm trying to say, though, is when I grew up in Beverly Hills, really, really safe, free from violent crime, I could walk half a mile, though, and the area between rich and poor were the areas where people had barred windows. Every time. So when it comes to criminality, there are things that we can address very fundamentally that will help everyone. I'm sure there are restructures to bail laws that we could do. I don't know the particulars. It's not my field. I've also read stuff on recidivism. Apparently, murder actually has a very low default recidivist rate because usually it's done under a very specific set of heated conditions that don't actually speak to a person's character, which makes you wonder a lot about like moral worth and what really drives a person to do that sort of thing. I think it's something we should look at critically, though I don't have any really strong data-based arguments. The last thing I want to say, because it's the first point that you brought up, is racial responses to the criminal justice system. Yeah, I didn't forget. I'm actually going to triple down on this one, okay? Not only do I think that we should aggressively look at the ways our sentencing laws affect and discriminate between black and white people and Hispanic and Asian, I think we should do the same between men and women. Because as much as black people are shafted by the criminal justice system, men are even more. If you take a look at the disproportionate rates of sentencing, relative levels of implicit bias,
that's going to play very
women
strange
get off with
way
more than men
Vaush,
do.
There's
going to be a lot of squad W's in chat
So,
not knowing how to feel that,
maybe it's
that Vaush just said
something
this
we
point.
Can agree on. We're guys, I think.
Well, so the issue though is that when you remove race, it's just a matter of income or wealth. For example, if LeBron James goes in front of a jury, he's going to have the best lawyers. And obviously that's an extreme example, right? But O.J. Simpson had an all-star team. And so the problem is that
Obama. He would also have good lawyers.
O.J. Simpson? Oh, yeah.
Obama.
No, sorry. I was gonna say, you didn't have Obama as a lawyer.
Let me
Here's some data showing. Here's some data showing like I'll leave this in chat, but this data showing like gun violence during COVID-19 pandemic and how the two are related. Just wanted to throw this guys for chat for a second. Okay, let's go back to the debate.
Kardashian and Dershowitz.
I would just like to interject that Obama extrajudicially assaciated people, and nobody did anything about it. So
now that's black privilege.
But
that's a joke. Don't.
But I think that there's an implication in your argument that I want to challenge, which is that just because you're poor doesn't mean you commit crimes. I think that's an insult to poor people, right? And so I think that if you automatically assume that, now there are data trends to suggest that. But instead it should be the question of
it's true that
what are we trying to structurally do
I'm sorry. I need to get paused. This whole thing about the thing about poverty is like if you don't concede that like people in poverty commit more crime, and basically like I would go the whole like right wing bootstraps way is that people in poverty just do stupid things that keeps them poor. You can concede that because if you don't, you're just downplaying the horrific impact that poverty has on people's lives. Like poverty ruins your brain, it ruins your judgment, it ruins your relationships, it ruins your entire perspective.
When you're hungry, man, there's a lot of stuff when I'm hungry that I'll do that I wouldn't do when I'm not hungry if I need to get a meal. Like there's just basic human behavior.
Yeah,
either punish the people that are committing crimes and lift people out of that current level. So I think it's a good talking point, but I don't think it's totally true to say we have too many people in prison. I think we have the wrong people in prison. Let me tell you why. Really quick.
We have more than like any other country.
No. Let me tell you why. The average rapist serves 4 years in prison, and they're very likely to rape again. Totally different than murder.
Look, if you want funding that goes to police departments to go towards actually looking at the rape kits that they take rather than stuffing them into a bin.
250,000 untested rape kits in the tri-state area in New York City. 250,000, right? So our criminal justice system, you could say it had nefarious intentions. I'll be neutral on that. It was very heavy.
What a position to fence it on, eh? I'll be neutral on racism and criminal justice. Okay, buddy. Yeah, also, MLK is a mixed bag. Any other hot takes you want to drop today, Charlie?
On drugs.
Can somebody in chat make a graphic for me that's like a Charlie Kirk quote that says, MLK was a mixed bag and put in parentheses, actual real Charlie Kirk quote, like it's one of those TPUSA memes. I want to post that. I really appreciate it.
Obviously in the 80s and 90s. But generally, though, you cited the number. You said violent crime's been down since the 90s. Why do you think that is? It's because we were tough on crime in the 80s, and we had a massive campaign against it, and we had the most peaceful decade in American history.
Well, there were a few factors. The viability of broken windows policing has been challenged substantially, but there are admittedly some benefits. The argument that I would make is that what you're really doing is you're forestalling the problem. There are socioeconomic conditions that increase criminality, not because it makes people worse people, but just because oftentimes crime isn't some direct indicator of poor moral conduct. Oftentimes it is a crime of necessity, or it is a crime born of the discontent and the apathy.
So I gotta challenge you on that. What would be a crime of necessity today with the welfare state that we have? what would possibly be a crime of necessity?
I can at least speak to personal experience that I knew some people involved in like they said they would sometimes peddle drugs, and they did it because while they may have been accounted for by the welfare state, their parents' medical bills weren't. Not sufficiently, not even close. Stuff like that. Now maybe legally, if that person got arrested, the law says they have to be. I could never morally condemn them. They were trying to save their mom, man.
But so, I got to push back on that. Sure. I mean, for sure, it's anecdotal, but
it is. So it's not like a data point. You know?
I never understood this. Having grown up on the South Side, seeing people sell drugs is not the fastest and easiest way to make money for someone who's desperate. I mean, no joke.
Plasma sales? What would you say?
I made $140 per hour playing guitar in front of a baseball field. Now, I understand not everyone can play guitar.
Fuck me. Just get guitar lessons,
Did he really just say that? That you can make more money playing guitar at baseball fields than selling crack? I'm sorry. Tim Pool does not understand the streets. Tim Pool and the streets do not have a relationship. He has never touched a crosswalk in his fucking life. I am sorry. I have no clue what the hell he's talking about.
Skateboard.
Or skateboard. True. I knew a guy who said he just bought T-shirts. He went and bought bulk T-shirts.
No, again, you'll make much more money on crack. Because the thing is, you buy one T-shirt. That's it. You don't buy just one crack. You keep coming back for more crack.
So the people who are selling drugs, they got to buy the drugs first. Or they get a loan, and you can do the same thing with socks. And then people go on the side of the road and sell socks. I think the choice of committing a crime was the choice.
Well, it is. Well, hold on. It is always a choice. But what we're really talking about is the limits of determinism here. How much do we choose the things we do? You can make an argument that it's all. I mean, you're religious, of course, so you wouldn't have this argument. But
I wouldn't have anything close to this argument.
Right. From a secular perspective, you can make the argument that at the end of the day, the things we do are driven entirely by the chemical reactions in our brain, and therefore everything that we do from start to finish is just a combination of random molecular patterns and blah blah. We don't live our lives like that. Obviously, I make a choice to get dressed every day. We know how this works in practice. But in practice, we are also the product of our environment. And the fact that, for example, having a single parent while growing up is a pretty strong criminal indicator is a suggestion that, I mean, is it an indicator of a person's inherent moral worth that they were born with a single parent? Probably not. So that statistical difference has to be accounted for.
Quick thing in chat. I want to know, what do you think you're going to make money quicker? Going into a house and just stealing a bunch of jewelry? Do you think that's going to be a quicker way to make money? Or setting up a lemonade stand? Okay, I wanna let's see the economists in chat figure that one out.
Inevitable fact.
I'm just waiting. Tim Pool is one step away from saying, "Come on,
the question is though, do you
just
then
film Occupy Wall Street protesters and compromise their input to the police?"
To say that we're actually not going to enforce looting. When you had an entire article in National Public Radio, not saying you believe this, that says the case for looting, right? San Francisco's basically employed this, $900 or less, they're not going to prosecute you, right? Videos of them stealing entire Walgreens, right? Not an exaggeration. And then you have, and just one other data point, just because of COVID, Europe's crime rates did not increase. Ours did. And we had a massive defund police, almost kind of, we're going to be relaxed on criminality type movement. And this is the question, right? Which is, how many excuses or accommodations are we going to give for crime?
Well, we're not.
And I'm just just to finish is that my perspective obviously is very little to none. Crime's a necessity. I could think of one, maybe two examples where I would make a moral claim of a crime of necessity, and that would be a revenge crime if someone murdered your wife or your kid. Maybe.
Necessity?
I'm not saying necessity. I'm saying like a moral accommodation where I could say I could see where they came from. Not necessity. Let me rephrase that. But the idea that in the welfare state that we have, with the private philanthropy kind of generosity we have, that shoplifting and arson and looting.
Dude, somebody needs to take the silver spoon out of Charlie Kirk and Tim Pool's mouth and shove it up their ass. None of these people know what it's like to be. This hurts. I'm sorry, like maybe they do, but if they did, that poverty was not an excuse for you to be this stupid after the fact about poverty, okay? You've experienced a very different poverty than I did, okay? What is the, oh my God.
Mugging Barbara Boxer, that we should just say, it's actually because of the environment.
I don't know why you pointed at me when you said I have never mugged Barbara Boxer.
I'm saying that as an example.
It was you. Yeah, I don't mean to,
was that you in San Francisco?
Where were you?
Yeah. No, I've gotten stolen from in San Francisco before. It was a very fun experience. That was back before YouTube too, so I couldn't afford to replace anything. Okay, a lot to respond to here. Emil Durkheim, cool guy, dead now, thought that crime was sociologically useful because it shows you where the antagonisms are between people's wants and the state's desires. So crime takes place where there's an agitation between what people are being compelled to do by whatever, their own behavior, their desires, and what the state will allow you to do. So, for example, during a food shortage, we can take like Ireland during the potato famine. There were, to put it lightly, quite a few cases of theft during that time because people needed food. They would do anything for it. So the crime of theft in that instance becomes a sociological indicator of a social need that isn't being met. Now today, of course, we do have admittedly a fairly weak...
I make a very similar argument about rioting, that rioting generally is not just a random thing of we need to crack down on something. It's usually a signal that there's something wrong with society that needs to be attended to, whether it's stopping the spreading of disinformation, from January 6th would be a good example of that, or addressing racism and income inequality or stuff like that. Like in Lebanon, the riots in there are obviously due to government mismanagement of the economy.
Existent welfare state.
It's rather strong. It's very generous.
It's a little baby welfare
multi-trillions
state.
of dollars every year.
Yeah, multi-trillion for
it's
America.
Like the least generous welfare
Nah.
state.
You get
Quadrillions.
$70,000 in value a year. That's plenty.
I want a UBI. We can go way harder.
We do have UBI. We just implemented it with the stimulus.
No, we did not. Well, oh, wait, hold on. Yes, the child tax credits with well, no,
people
that's
got
really
cash
good.
checks. We have UBI now.
Well, it's not a long-standing program.
I'll admit that, but we've tried UBI and crime went up.
Well, hold on. Wait, hold on. Wait. I need to reject the spurious.
We send
Oh my
checks.
God.
People commit crimes. Huh.
Hold on. This is a spurious correlation, okay? First of all, you will not be able to find any analysis that attributes the increase in crime to people getting their stimulus checks.
No, I'm saying it's the opposite. The argument you're making is that if people have a sociological need, they won't commit the crime. So people got money and they still committed crimes.
Yeah, but it doesn't always correspond one-to-one like that. The reason why people needed money is because they weren't getting any money from their jobs because they couldn't work their jobs. So people were still in a worse position.
Well, they also got unemployment. Remember, very generous unemployment.
The unemployment started
plus
pretty generous.
$600 to $800, right? I think it was a week or a month, right? It was very
still
generous.
currently
that run through, and not everyone.
Chad, I got some bad news. Since we're all paying attention to this, here's some real news unrelated to this. Nina has lost the election in Ohio's 11th to Chantel Brown. Nina Turner has lost. I am sorry to be the person to tell you all that news.
Not everyone is applicable for unemployment. There are a lot of conditions there that can.
I'm going to get some.
No, they were very generous. They didn't turn anyone down during the lockdown.
We're being very spurious with our.
Well, we're very wonky.
Right,
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I'm just.
Oh God, where was I?
Something about some dead guy about how crime is helpful.
I love dead white guys. I actually don't know if Durkheim was white. So I'm not pro-crime, not pro-criminal here. I'm pro-leniency only insofar as I believe it helps to lower our recidivism. Sometimes it finds that it does. For example, you're in prison for 20 years. What do you know? You know the inside of a jail cell. The environment in prison is very bad at encouraging people to get their life together when they get out. And that's why so many people, they get out of prison, they have 6 months on the street before they're back in. Sometimes it's because they want to go back in. Prison's all they know. They did a movie about that. Sorry.
Shawshank Redemption.
And it was a good movie.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, which only serves my point. But with regards to being lax on crime or whatever, there are a couple of things I think we should all agree to, okay? First of all, well, maybe we wouldn't. Drugs is bad. We need to stop locking people up for weed, just flat out. I think that drugs in general should be treated like a medical issue. Portugal did that. They decriminalized all drugs. So
there's conflicting data on Portugal, but fine.
It's pretty promising. So you take like heroin. Nobody wants to be on heroin, okay? If you're on heroin, in the fleeting moments you have in between your little sessions, you know something's up. So you treat that like a medical issue. Say, hey, we have government offices. You want to come by. That helps. Far fewer overdose deaths. And those people, they go ahead, they become socially productive. Bam. No crime. They contribute to the economy. It just works better than locking them up.
I wanted to say something you mentioned with UBI, you mentioned with the unemployment, the stimulus. First of all, we've actually had a really hard time hiring for specific work, like labor stuff, because nobody wants to work. And no joke, I've been having conversations like every other day, like, can we find some people? And it's like, we can't find anybody. We got signs up and down all throughout the area where it's like, come in, open
I'll
interviews.
work for you, Tim. I'm right here.
We had over 800.
Come on, Tim. I live in Maryland. It's so easy.
Shortages, and now we're facing fuel shortages because there's a trucker shortage. We're looking at this this unemployment stimulus thing where they're doing the $300 bonus. Now they're doing the child tax credit, which won't be for everybody. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing a correlation with massive job openings and people not taking these jobs.
I think it's phenomenal. Finally, the bargaining power is in the hands of the workers more so.
But It's broken. Like the flights are shutting down. Nobody wants the jobs, even when they do increase the salaries.
So it's true, the flights are an issue. But here's what they don't tell you in the news briefs. So stock buybacks, something that many companies now do because of their decriminalization. The airline companies have spent an anomalous amount of their profits each year on stock buybacks to enrich their CEOs and shareholders, rather than on hiring more pilots. It seems the issue here is this is a simple supply-demand issue. People need to raise their wages. You see these news stories from time to time where it's like, I raised my wage to $15 an hour, and people showed up. And it's like, yeah, that is how economics works.
We had John Schnatter, Papa John, on the show, and he told us a story about a pizzeria where they were paying $35 an hour to some of their pizza cooks or bakers. Because that was a line. He kept trying to find people. Nobody would do it. He kept raising wages. Finally, he settled on $35 an hour. That means pizzas are going to basically more than double because the wage they were paying before was like 15, and now they're over double what they were paying in labor. Their labor costs go up. They have no choice but to charge.
Guys, I know a lot of you saying, but there's only 41% in for Nina. The areas that have been called yet are the areas that Nina would have needed to win in order, bigger, in order to get the election. It's over. It's done.
Substantially more for pizza.
Nina lost.
In the short term, within a month or so, that might have an impact on those pizza makers. But the ripple effect is going to slam into everybody. All of a sudden, the contractor can't afford to take his family out for dinner. He can't afford to buy the food he wants, because the base level costs are going to start going up. Then the landlords aren't going to be able to hire the maintenance crews to fix the buildings. The landlords are on fixed pricing, which they can't change, which then results in a brick wall, a collapse.
I just want to say, what we're having right now is an unprecedented economic shock. For a year, nobody worked, or very few people worked. And people got used to staying at home. And as the government should, it should have done more, but as the government should, it took care of them a little bit. We have to ride this out. What are government funds for but riding us out through common crises? Better this than war. And now people are returning to work, and they're realizing work sucks. Work sucks everywhere. But in this country, compared to maybe some of our equally developed contemporaries, work really sucks. The work culture, our rate of overproductivity, the Americans more than any other developed country, by the way, we push our workers hard. And you have favorable employment numbers, but you don't have favorable underemployment numbers. There are a lot of people who have jobs, but they have 2 to 3 part-time jobs. They don't get their schedule for the next month until 2 weeks before the end of the current one. They're constantly worrying about whether or not they're going to make their shifts line up to get enough hours to get the money they need to pay down their student debt along with their rent and everything. It sucks, and it's untenable, and we are in an era of unprecedented record profits for CEOs. So yes, I think the solution to this, and it'll be a rough one, that's for sure, is we should normalize higher wages. Maybe the solution to $15 an hour was never a federal mandate. Maybe it was the inevitable economic necessity of incentivizing workers.
Hard to disagree with a lot of that. I will say that the lockdowns were way too harsh and intense. I will say there is a Fifth Amendment argument to be made, though, that if the government forces you to not work, then you should be able to get something in return. The government cannot take something from you constitutionally and not pay you for it. That's the eminent domain argument, right? Which was one of the best arguments for the stimulus package. I just think the lockdowns were far too severe and far too intense. And
I'm still stuck up on the states' rights thing. I'm still thinking about he really fucking said that shit in 2021. I'm still stuck on that with MLK. So his quotes from today: MLK is a mixed bag. Confederacy was kind of about states' rights. What else do we have that was good today?
You forgot the fucking ultimate. The only crime of necessity I can think of is if someone fucked my wife. Yeah. That's it. Watching this guy improvise is like watching a clown run over a minefield. It's fucking amazing.
And really infringed.
I'd love to see him just be thrown onto a stage and said, "Hey, you got stand up, go!" No prep, just see what he does.
On people's liberties and abilities to be able to take risks. I want to go a different direction. I just want to ask you a question. It's just more kind of about human nature. Mm-hmm. Do you think human beings are naturally good or naturally bad as human nature?
Tabula rasa. I really think we are.
Blank slate.
Mm-hmm. Maybe there's some inclination. We're hardwired to be social. I know that. We're also, at least to some extent, hardwired to be self-serving. The best society merges those two. The best interest for you is the best interest for everyone. The social contract from now until we die.
Locke's, Rousseau's, or Hobbes? Which social contract?
Fucking dickhead.
I guess I would just say the ubiquitous philosophical term more so than
well, because they all wrote on those terms, right? And they totally disagreed.
They all thought different things of humans. They all thought
Hobbes had a very dark view. Rousseau very positive. Locke was more neutral.
Socialists tend to think that human beings are fundamentally positive, but I reject that.
That's why I'm curious, because you see way too cynical for that.
Well, the implicit suggestion to that, to me, is that socialists think their system would only work if everyone was nice, and I don't believe that. I think that the best economic systems will work when everyone is an absolute POS, just a dirty, horrible human being, and
very
you can incentivize them. Well, but it should. Maybe humans are amazing, but the best systems should survive human greed.
I want to ask you a very simple and general question.
Uh-oh. Those are the worst ones to answer.
It is. Do you think some people are better than other people?
Can I add a bit of nuance to that answer?
Answer however you want.
I think that some people have been developed to be more moral and of better character.
Oh no, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't mean moral.
Just better, like they're taller.
That's it.
Oh,
however, but I think your interpretation.
What's the point of the
by
question?
any metric, there will always be people who are better than others.
Do you believe there are
always
Chad,
perhaps by
betas,
some
and alphas?
combination of
Good
environment
sir.
and genetics. I just hope that we can all ride along.
I personally, Tim Pool, am a Sigma.
Well, do you mean Chad and Beta in the Hobbesian sense? Or
Hobbesian sense? Chad and Beta in the Hobbesian sense?
I agree. I think, I mentioned this before the show. If you were to ask anybody on the left or the right, what did you want? It would be like for everyone to prosper, for people to be successful, to pull people out of poverty, things like that. I guess the issue is disagreeing on how we get there.
Well, I think I'm not sure if we want the same thing. I want more a preservation and conservation of what we already have.
Do you want socialism?
Absolutely not.
Oh no, slight ideological.
No, but come on.
I mean, we don't need to play the word games. Go
No,
ahead.
Why do you want to preserve?
Well,
Vaush is also. Can I just say that Vaush is coming off very likable here?
Yeah.
Full, unique, and exceptional. And I take the more Hobbesian view of human.
Maybe he should give his opinion on Israel.
Which is we're brutish and nasty and awful and cruel. And the fact we've been able to build something decent and civil is pretty remarkable.
But are you saying that we have a good system?
A great system.
And people thrive from the system?
Yeah, I think people flourish and thrive. I think that a rights-based system is naturally the best way to govern.
Do you want people to be stripped of their rights, imprisoned, brutalized, impoverished?
Of course not. No. And I mean, the sacrificing of rights is something that usually has to be earned negatively, like murdering somebody.
So this is what I mean, because I think I could ask you the same question. Do you want people to be brutalized, impoverished, imprisoned?
Of course not.
Taking their rights away.
But I would never want to grow complacent. You're both familiar with the Marxian theory of dialectic materialism.
You
correct?
mean Hegel's theory?
Oh no, he had
no, that's
the
not
dialectic, and we built on it.
What is he?
I'd
love to get into. I really want to get into the Marx thing because I'm super fascinated by it.
No, I just want to say, the theory. I mean, put simply, I guess, is that human society, the human project, it evolves as a product of antagonism. Grinding antagonism between people in Marxian view of different.
That's very Hegelian, yeah.
Well, yeah, no, I mean he was a student of Hegel.
I know he was part of this. He was the young Hegelian.
Yeah,
and he won the argument.
Well, no, I'm not. Well, you're not. I'm just saying, like he would get mad at you if you said he was Hegelian influence, but I don't think I would. Hegel was a smart guy. I just can't read his work because
the phenomenology of spirit is impossible to read.
Thank you. All right, I was worried you're going to make fun of me. I just want to say,
no, it's really hard. He made the very simple complex.
Yeah.
We agree on something.
I just want to say, sorry. I just want to, the project of humans moving forward. I think that antagonism fuels it, but in the best way. Not antagonism like war, but antagonism in the sense that we look at our ideas, our values, and we challenge them.
So I just want to say something we disagree on. I don't think humanity's a project.
Do you think we're headed towards something better than what we have today?
Probably not. Oh. I think that we're actually.
Number one, he doesn't understand Hobbes. He keeps saying Hobbes. I don't think he knows who Hobbes is. I don't think you could tell who Hobbes was from like an ice cream truck driver. Number two, that is the saddest thing I've ever heard in my life. That this is it? Really? This is it? We're not doing anything more? No space-faring civilization? Nothing? This is the future?
In essence, that's like a very consistent conservative
maybe
argument.
He
it's like
thinks
every
it's
period is the end of history.
Maybe it's Calvin and Hobbes. Maybe he got it confused with the old
no,
comic
he's
series.
half Charlie Kirk always does this. He's always like half right when he cites philosophers and just really weird. So Hobbes did say that people were like solitary, brutish, and like just ill-tempered and selfish and all that. But like he also, in the book Leviathan, he talks about how the solution is to have like a very like almost like to have like state terror over people to encourage good behavior from people.
Yeah,
But then
but
you look
Charlie,
further in, and there's a lot more about like persuasion. And what he's doing with
he's trying to use
Hegel
Hobbes to like go against what Hobbes would have advocated for.
Yeah. And then with the Marx and Hegel thing, like Hegel's dialectic was a conflict of ideas, an evolution of opinions, like one theory and its opposite, then they form a synthesis, whereas Marx was a conflict of material interests. So they are very different. I don't know why he's
It'd be like if I read
like
like the MLK and it was like writing a bunch of like anti-racist theories, like damn, better join the Klan. It's like, wait, that's a kind of a weird, like exact opposite of the conclusion you should have came to there. Like the exact opposite of where most people would have gone with that. It's like reading Marxist theory and then being like, so we need to go further into capitalism. It's like, okay, that's not what you should have taken from that, but okay.
I don't know if
so Hobbes would have disagreed with him, to be clear.
We're probably engaging in the second law of thermodynamics currently, that we're untangling. We're going to chaos, not order.
See, this to me, this is the thing, and I'm not trying to patronize. Conservatives have been shown to be more fearful on average, and I think if they thought that way, it would be very warranted.
But
stop quoting, wow, better join the Klan. That's not a Dylan Burns quote. Delete that immediately.
some fears are legitimate. You know,
certainly.
Winston Churchill's fears about the evil Germans were legitimate.
No, I'm not. No, fear is not always illegitimate, and there are elements of this.
That's a weird way to say it.
Society is
evil Germans
from climate change.
That's another improv.
Like
that was probably the most illegitimate thing of Churchill.
For sure.
He thought it was Germans, not Nazis.
We'll see it, assuming COVID doesn't get you. We'll live to see some pretty severe. We see it right now.
You know, my problem is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I see all the news, I see all the arguments about climate change, and I'm like, I understand them. And then you get Obama buying beachfront property, you get the celebrities flying in airplanes, and I'm like, how am I supposed to trust any of these people?
Got to get Bernie. Guy rode the train to work. He didn't have to do that. Bernie's the man.
True revolutionary. So,
just to finish
Bernie,
the point.
He meant that ironically, and Charlie thought he was serious. Should he have walked to work with like sandals on? Now, don't buy real sandals. Like put wood blocks, tie them like old Japanese style, like run to work. The 70-year-old man.
I'm sorry.
Wait, for somebody who was complaining about irony in the like start of the whole debate, he really doesn't understand it.
Because I kept getting sidetracked.
But the idea of the human project is super interesting to me because that's a collision point we're going to have. So
yeah, well, I'd like to think, I mean, people have always said this is the best it gets. You know, the Postmaster General back in, was it the Postmaster General or was it the Patent Office?
No, the Patent Office, 1900, all the patents have been made.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's the best it's been. I'm not saying improvement is not possible.
Maybe we can make little improvements, but when I try to put myself in the shoes of men past, you know, I don't know, somebody in feudal China. And to them, what I live in today would have been incomprehensible to them in every imaginable sense, every conceivable way. But their arguments for the permanence of society then would have been better than mine today because they would have lived in a stable feudal society for millennia. And today, I now am here using technology that would have been alien to humans 20 years ago.
This is a really good point.
I think about like the Cultural Revolution. I think about the revolution in
Jim
Russia.
Poole just saved him.
And you mentioned the conservatives tend to be more fearful, and I think there's history that shows us things can go bad. You can have something
Vaush
that's good, not
as
great,
a feudal
could probably
Chinese
be better,
peasant.
and then end up with an unchecked movement that results in millions dead.
For sure.
20 to 40 million, I think, in the Cultural Revolution. We had Lily Tong Williams on the other night, and she was telling us these stories. They're scary.
Always hindsight, right? Because people thought this about every major event in social progress in America's history as well. The breakup, the Confederacy, the Civil War, the fight to abolish slavery, sure. You know, suffrage for women, yes. The Civil Rights Act, yes. Gay marriage, yes. Every time we make a step forward, you're probably anti-gay marriage, right? Because are you?
I'm pro-traditional marriage.
Okay, sure,
Yeah.
Right. Anti-gay marriage. Pro-traditional. Gotcha. Every time,
don't let him slither away.
Every time we take a step forward. Well, we agreed on the
Snake.
3-parent household before.
I disagreed on
That was
polyamory, actually.
50% more efficient than the previous.
Can he actually hammer him home more a little bit? Like, so you're anti-gay marriage. Just to be clear, you're anti-gay marriage. Can we get the polling on that quick? I would like to see the polling on that. Hammer him on that.
That's not actually a study, is it?
And 10 times more chaotic
are you actually
and
citing
way more perverse.
I'm not actually citing anything.
It's possibly not a linear growth.
That's actually true.
pattern with parents in
Polyamory
the
is.
household.
It's actually
More
exponential. It's
Say that for me. I heard.
He was saying that polyamory was more chaotic and more perverse, and I was like,
True.
Yep.
True.
nice one,
Yeah,
my boy.
Yeah, did you know when you watch Dylan Burns TV streams, you're 20% more likely to be a psychopath? Real data.
It just goes up forever.
That's very.
Albert Einstein had 12 parents.
By the time you hit 12 parents, the children just a god. By the way, just a
it's like a warp
very Ubermensch. But continue. Yeah.
Sorry. It always feels like everyone argues like this is the best it gets, and any future steps would be treacherous. But then we always make that next step. I don't know if America's going to be around forever. We're a young country, and countries far older than ours have fallen in the lifetime of America. So I can't look at what we have today, or the people that I live with, or the values that I believe in, and assign to them a feeling of permanence. But I can say this: I fear stagnation, and every country that has ever set itself upon stagnation has always died. Every time. Every country always seeks to better itself, and maybe that road to betterment leads to ruin, but the path of stagnation is always ruinous.
I agree. Our culture has stagnated severely. One thing I always bring up is like Christmas music written in the 50s. We still play it nonstop over and over again. Movies have become repetitive, redundant, reboots. It's devolved from where we had these interesting pieces of art to just regurgitated crap over and over again.
Can I just take some exception with your argument? First of all, there is this kind of revisionist belief that somehow conservatives, in the traditional sense, were against some of those social movements, which is just not true. Now, I'm not saying you'd be a Confederate, and I'm not even getting to the party switching thing, but there is a direct lineage between hyper-focusing on racial politics in the 1860s and the 1920s, and some of the people on the American left that are just completely obsessed with American, racial politics.
It's equality.
This is incorrect. This is not only is this incorrect. This is historically just like a lie. If you look at what the American left today, and you track back to then, when it comes to access to the vote, when it comes to black people being able to run for office, when it comes to black activism, right? You know what it wasn't? It wasn't like hardcore black conservatives running for office. Like, you know what? Put me back in chains. That wasn't happening, okay? It was black left-wingers running on the Republican ticket, but that has to do with the party switch, which he said we weren't getting into. It was on the left, when you could say they concentrated on racial politics, but it had to do with black people's liberation, not black people's enslavement, which that racialized politics has us tied to people like Nathan Bedford Forrest, which is actually a statue that the Republicans tried to guard in his home state, who was a deep supporter of the Ku Klux Klan and someone who massacred regiments of black troops. So when we talk about like the racialization, I mean, yeah, but it was like racialization in like, please don't lynch black people.
Versus hierarchy, right?
But what do you mean by that?
Well, back then the slave owners wouldn't have been like, I'm really obsessed with race. Well, equality. Now it's obsession with race can be pernicious in many ways, but I think there's a pretty big difference between being obsessed with the idea of racial equality and being obsessed with
I think
racial
it's
domination.
equally as pernicious, just they don't have the power to implement it. But we kind of already did that.
Do you think I'd do that? Like
you? No, I don't think you would. I mean, I don't know you well enough. You seem rather decent.
I try my best.
But like I wouldn't give power to Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Quick, someone send him the Vaush Discord DMs. We'll get him. We'll red pill Charlie and Vaush.
I don't know who that is.
She founded the 1619 Project?
Oh, I just read the thing. I don't know.
We have a constitution to prevent us against people like that. What I'm saying though is that, for example, I'm not against social change. I mean, I'd love to abolish abortion, for example. I'd love to put fathers back in the home.
No doubt.
So conservatives are not necessarily always saying, no, we don't want to improve. We want to stagnate. We want the correct form of social change.
So let me ask this then. Let's get to the core of it then. What value?
I like that he can say, I want to abolish abortion, and it's just no doubt, and then it's done. Like the abolishing abortion would lead to just pushing abortion underground. Like a prohibition for things like that have never historically worked. Ever.
Yeah, that's code for abolish safe abortions.
Yeah, it's code for basically get the coat hanger back in here. Let's bring this, like, hey, it's no longer Dr. like Woodrow or whatever, or Dr. Brown. It's gonna be Dr. Stairs, right? That's what's gonna happen.
Are you looking?
I hate how he talks about how he's like, he doesn't like this idea of society as a project or humanity as a project. Yet he wants to, like, the whole thing about the 1776 Commission was that he wanted to cultivate a society of grateful, like, minimally critical Americans. He's kind of admitting that constantly.
He is, actually. Yeah.
It's not
this
just
is a
like,
great question.
Not just like morality, because that could mean the same thing or different things to anyone. But if you were to look at a society and were asked to assess its worth, what metrics would you look towards?
Its ability to defend those that can't defend themselves.
Okay.
Charity, generosity, integrity, faith to your creator, the ability to pass down good and moral values to the next generation, one that believes in work, and one that believes in the cause of the nation above the self.
All right.
I've got an idea.
I think that's a fairly collectivist point, that last one, though, wouldn't it be?
Well,
the nation above itself.
I mean, you could call it collectivist, but I wouldn't say the state. I'd say the idea of the nation, right? So there's two different things, and those are conflated sometimes by libertarian socialist types, which is a walking contradiction. I'd love to ask you about that.
Sure.
But just like it's kind of just being like a Christian atheist, right?
I might answer it when you're done, by the way, because I think my follow-up might touch on that.
Yeah, but the state is a creation of the people. The people are the country. That's why our Constitution, the preamble, says we the people, not we the federal government, right? So the people are the nation. And so that's why I differentiate between the two. Do you have a loyalty? Do you have a belief that you want to create something bigger than yourselves? I think that's a moral good.
To me, and I mean this without meaning to hyperbolize, but to me that's always strung rather fascist. The myth of the common man, the people, the Volk, the idea that there is a state, and Germany was a state, of course, but Hitler didn't really appeal to the state. It was the concept of the fatherland that he really hit on, and the people.
Volk is such a cool word, and I can't use it because I sound like a fascist every time I use it, but it's such a cool German word, Volk. The Volk shall rise. Like, it sounds so cool, but it just sounds uber fascist.
Were a beating heart of the fatherland. They were an instrumental organ. And to me, the problem with this is that when you get down to it, this thought process, this mentality, it drives men to do terrible, terrible things. Because interpersonally, all of the chemical effects of empathy kick in. I look at you, I see you. But you start bringing in concepts like the nation, the fatherland, and it becomes very easy to convince people to compel themselves towards courses that they would otherwise not.
So, expected you to use a 1930s reference earlier, so congratulations.
No, well, I'm only saying, I'm not calling you a fascist. I'm only saying
I know, you did do the correct, I didn't mean to hyperbolize, but there's other nations today that have those values that we would never call fascist, like Japan. Japan has very strict immigration.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Korea is actually a better example, to be honest.
I really don't like either of those countries for the reasons that I've described.
You don't like Korea?
I think they're both deeply conservative countries.
I agree with you.
Right.
They're wonderful.
And I think they do so in part because there's a degree of.
I mean, look at the suicide rates quick. I just want to look at the suicide rates of these countries. Just like a quick oh wait, skyrocketing. Crazy. It's almost like they're not like having just a completely hyper-capitalist system where you don't care about people's personal well-being, and self-care is something that people don't care about at all. It could lead to people that's feeling like, I don't know, a cog in the machine and disposable to the point where they want to kill themselves. I don't know.
I think it's also really worth bringing in the fact that like Japan's approach to education is so identical to Charlie Kirk's. It's so just like, we kind of like, okay, we acknowledge there are bad things, but like we will actually diminish them to the point because it's worth it to have citizens who aren't too critical of, like, it's so like, the same way that Charlie Kirk was saying that we
somebody
should
just said in chat that Japan's suicide rate is lower than the U.S. Exactly. That's a point about the United States, not a point about Japan. But you were saying something. I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah, the same way that Charlie Kirk was saying he's against the 1619 project and the whole like we need to insist that it's state rights, not state rights of slavery and all that. It's like, it's so identical to the way that the Japanese education system treats Imperial Japan.
True. It's a complete like revisionism about like the rape of Nanking, and there's actually like whole like organizations that their only purpose is to try to make sure that Japanese education just whitewashes World War II.
Anti-individualism and the subservience they all expect of the common good. Now, it's funny, I feel like our roles are being reversed a little bit here.
Isn't that interesting?
The common good isn't something I appeal to. For me, the value I want to maximize.
No, I just appeal to the good.
The good, sure, the
which
good.
Which is two different things.
Is freedom. That's what I care about most. And that's what libertarian socialism is about. There are many types of freedoms, positive and negative. If I might indulge very briefly, like, is a man thrown to a lawless desert without food, water, or clothing free?
I thought he was about to do the coconut. I was right there. I was ready for it. I was ready.
Really asking.
So, probably no.
I agree. He's free to die.
But that's an extreme example, not applicable in modern wealthy America.
No,
or any Western nation.
But it's a philosophical base.
It's also a Rousseauian argument. Man's born free, and he, spends the rest of his life in chains. It's just anti-commercial in nature.
Well, no, but it's a base philosophical argument because it's true. There's
a good argument from
There's
Vaush.
nothing preventing him from doing anything in that environment, but he has no ability to act on his
But do you know
desires.
what he does have? consciousness.
Well, sure.
So that's a natural rights doctrine that I will defend.
Well, I mean, I like consciousness too. The only point that I'm getting at is when it comes to people's freedom and the ability for people to protect their freedom, this is what I care about. It's what Marx cared about. If you actually read what he wrote, and
I've read Das Kapital, I've read the Manifesto, and guess what? He was right about some things.
Then you know.
But not everything.
He didn't talk
he was really wrong
about equality. He didn't write on equality. He wrote on freedom because he believed that society was a very complex interlocking network of systems that in some ways liberated men and in other ways enslaved them.
But do you know what he got wrong? He got wrong that sometimes people can be free for other devices that they are not able to regulate. They can be free not from alcoholism, drug addiction, some sort of any other sort of perverse addiction. The idea of freedom is a very libertarian.
But I agree with that, though.
No, I know you do.
The greatest society.
I say that. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just the greatest society is one where a man is born and there are as few things as possible preventing him from doing whatever he wants for the rest of his life.
I totally disagree.
So long as, of course, he doesn't deprive others of the ability to do the same.
So I think that's a miserable society.
Freedom?
No, that's not freedom. That's licentiousness or degeneracy. That's
$10.
chaos.
What is degeneracy?
Breaking. Nina
I like
Turner
men.
eats
How
a bowl
about
of Biden.
pedophilia?
Thank you, Mehdi Hassan, for that incredible interview. Get dumped on Turner.
This is the funniest fucking conversation.
Do you
This
think?
is. I think this is. It's gonna get good here. Fuck. It's actually gonna. This is.
Can I
gonna
go
help
back
us
for a
out.
second? I want to hear what exactly
Freedom
he
deprived
said.
for the rest of his
I
life.
totally disagree.
So long as, of course, he doesn't deprive others of the ability to do the same.
So I think
Yeah.
that's a miserable
So
society.
pedophilia is a terrible
Freedom?
example.
Yeah, no, this is not a good example. It's not because
Oh,
it
Charlie
robs
Kirk.
the freedom of other because that's you imposing yourself. He has no clue what he's talking about. He has no clue. He has no clue. And because that impedes on the freedom, the bodily autonomy of another human being. It's... Oh my God, man.
No, that's
Charlie,
not
the
freedom.
headphones in.
That's licentiousness or degeneracy. That's chaos.
What is degeneracy? I like men.
How about pedophilia?
Okay. Well, obviously
You said
that would
whatever
infringe-
he wants. Is
as long as
pedophilia
they don't-
freedom, Vaush?
As long as they don't infringe on the rights of others. I'm sure you could believe. I would believe.
Well,
that
so
infringes on the
there
rights of
are
others.
limits on freedom, is what you're saying. It's not this Wild West
Yeah, well,
campaign.
as
So
long
where do you
as you-
get those limits from?
Well, obviously you would.
He just told you when it limits others, as in limiting the bodily autonomy of somebody else when it comes to rape. Oh my God. Do you think the thing is about Vaush in this debate is he released debate preps and they were public. So his team probably at some point gave him this. Like anybody with any basic media training would watch that debate prep publicly, try to look at that. Because I don't really like to do debate pub publicly because I know people will look at that. Like if you see like a public source like I'm preparing to debate you, you're gonna probably look at that to be like most people would. They had that debate prep in advance, and yet he's still making points like that. Well, I guess no amount of prep can stop you if you need like years of personal growth and like development on like these issues.
Yeah, I don't know how much media training can help when the thing you really need is like a few years away from like on a fucking hill with some like quiet reading and
With some
no
monks
iPhone
and like
shit.
like a book.
Like he came to this event with a post-it of just like lists of books that he's pretended to read. Fucking Das Kapital. Okay, sure.
Probably have to have a pretty complex interlocking legal system to determine what we agree upon.
I don't even think Marx read Das Kapital. Who reads Das Kapital, honestly?
Hey, Ben, the buddy. Sorry, hi, 1 second. All right, just keep going. It's fine.
On is like a reasonable limits we can place on people's behavior. We have that now to an extent.
No, I know. So like pedophilia bad.
that
right?
would be a bad thing.
Okay, kidnapping,
That would be a bad thing.
rape.
That would be a bad thing.
Why do you think those things are bad?
I think they're bad because you're stripping other people of the ability to do that which they will. With all those examples, you're inflicting harm on a person.
How about dealing drugs?
I think that dealing drugs is a person's freedom, as is taking a
But
person's.
you're taking
What
some-
about dealing drugs to kids?
Dealing drugs to kids? I think I would disagree with that, probably because I think there's something exceptional about addictive substances and children. That being said, I think a lot of stuff would apply to children specifically. Contract law. Kids can't sign contracts,
So
but there's nothing wrong
do you see what
with
I'm getting at?
contracts.
Eventually, you do agree that a conservative framework is necessary.
But I don't think that's a conservative framework because there are other things I care about that you would always disagree with, like collective ownership of the means of production.
Yeah, I totally disagree.
Which,
I think private property and freedom are linked together.
which
Here's-
would give workers the most freedom possible.
We've definitely gone along because it was just
But this has
so
been
it was
helpful,
fantastic.
right?
It was fantastic.
Also, I do want to bring up the fact that, as brought in chat, Japan and Korea are one of the most racist countries in the world. And so, like, when we talk about conservatism and, like, what nations are based when it comes to conservatism, as a nation that is extremely diverse and built by immigrants, probably not a great system to bring to the United States. Gotta be honest. Gotta be honest, Chief. Where were we?
Bush.
Wrong one. Where were we?
There he is.
That's Charlie. Kyle Kalinske. Oh, he's coming with a steel chair.
It feels like it's been 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, I know.
I know, right. And Ian, you've collected a bunch of great.
Like 50 at least.
So right.
I'm gonna use the restroom. Is that okay?
All right, yeah, go do it
It's
to
gonna
it.
take like 100 seconds.
Yeah.
You can time me.
I'm kind of interested what you think about. I think humans are inherently destructive by nature, and that if you took a human and put him in a room with a bunch of small animals and plants, over time, his hunger, purely because of hunger, ultimately, he would destroy and consume all of those animals and all of those plants. And then if you put another human in there,
so if you put him in a condition where destruction is the only means of survival, then they'd be destructive. That means they're not naturally destructive. Fuck.
Amazing. Who the fuck is this guy? No,
I love him.
You know what? The thing is, Tim Pool said he can't hire somebody. He could, if this is his standard for needing to hire people, he could hire literally anybody.
one of those would eventually destroy and consume the other human.
I do think that we are maybe inherently expansionist. I think that might be a defining trait of our species.
Life.
We conquered the world, and God willing, we survive. 1,000 years from now, we'll conquer the stars, and that's unique to us. Other animals don't do that. I don't know if that's a good thing. Maybe everything would have been better.
They do this. Every animal does. The issue is
Build
that
spaceships?
No.
Animals build cities.
1 second. Somebody in chat just, what country isn't racist, xenophobic? Every country has racism and xenophobia, but some countries are more racist and xenophobic than others. I don't think that's hard to believe.
Don't do that. I don't know if that's a good thing. Maybe everything would have been better.
They do this. Every animal does. The issue is
Build
that
spaceships?
No. Expansion.
Oh, yeah. But
I not build spaceships. That'd be cool though. Dolphins taking off.
Over time, the limits of their abilities constrain them to a given area, a given population. But we clearly haven't been kept in that way.
Intelligence has separated
smart.
us from that from the equilibrium.
And Dylan Burns pretending that the U.S. is anywhere near the top of racism is plain stupid. I never said we're near the top of the racism spectrum on the world. I don't think we're near the bottom either, but I never made that allegation. But I mean, any racism is bad, so you should fight against all racism. Is your argument like we're medium racist, so we don't need to care? Like, what is? I need to just ignore chat.
A lion chasing a gazelle. The gazelle, runs faster. The lion has to run faster. The zebras and the stripes are confusing. Some get away, some don't. There's a natural adaptation process. We know what evolution is. But humans, we adapt instantly. We are like, hey, that bird's flying. I got an arrow.
And we have, and there are. I just want to say, talking about evolution.
Not controversial topic.
No. Well, in a non-controversial way. Believe it or not, you'll have to catch the behind-the-scenes release. I just want to say that I don't have much optimism for the human condition. I'm not like a huge optimist about this. We are, I think, very potentially destructive. I just think that we also experience, or we're better receptive to reward incentives than any other thing.
Ian's got a bunch of questions.
Yes.
So for everybody who's super chatted, we were having Ian, we mentioned in the beginning, go through and try and find really good questions.
Can we submit the image of Charlie Kirk saying MLK is a mixed bag as a super chat? I don't think that's possible. We could submit the link, couldn't we?
Yeah.
But that's not worth it. They wouldn't do
You
it.
could send the quote. I really want to send in the only crime of necessity I can think of is killing a guy because he fucked my wife. That's just brilliant.
He's like, hey, maybe that's a sore spot for him. You don't want to bully him over that. Don't want to bully him over some recent trauma. I don't know.
A lot of people are saying really awesome things. I want to read one that's not a question real quickly. It's from Adam Schrader, who said, so far this whole conversation reminds me of friendly bar discussions 10 years ago. I miss that world. Thank you, Vaush and Charlie, for being excellent. Thank you, Tim, for steel manning. You all have leader demeanors. I know a lot of people disagree with each other, especially in the chat. Not everyone gets along, but I think it's a fantastic conversation.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Charlie.
Ian's got some questions.
Let me bring them to you.
And then afterwards, if we still have time permitting, I would like to do the member segment and then personally be more involved than I've been for the most part.
Sorry, we've been.
Well, no, that was kind of the point.
Back to arm wrestling.
There's a million things. I'm like, and I did interject. You guys know I did.
Just toggle to the right to go through all of them.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
Okay.
These
These are some pretty good ones. So you just said press. Okay, there we go. So Ian's pulled some super chats. M asks, Please ask each guest if they agree or disagree with the statement. Abortion breaks the non-aggression principle, and why?
I mean, obviously, yeah. I think abortion is immoral.
Oh,
we should do
God.
our best
No,
to eradicate it.
I don't want...
I don't really believe in the NAP. I understand people's discomfort with abortion. I think that unfortunately it's a legal necessity as a byproduct of some very compelling personhood arguments I've heard in the past, which I would have to read up on again before reciting.
Can I ask a question? When do you think life begins?
Here
I
we
don't know
go.
what life is.
So how about your life? You have life right now. When did your life begin?
I don't remember the first 6 months of my life. I genuinely don't
Looking
know.
at the development of a human life, when would you say that begins?
I know when human bodies develop. The genuine answer that I have is that I think that it's always going to be dictated somewhat by intuition. The intuitive answer from me is life begins at birth. That's my intuitive. If you asked me, like, that's what feels right, but I'm sympathetic to other perspectives.
What about when DNA is formed?
Well, that would be a conception, right? Or at least right after. Well, that's not what, obviously that's not the metric that I would look at.
How about heartbeat?
That's 6 weeks? No, earlier.
As early as 6 weeks, could be as early as as late as 6 weeks, early as 25 days.
Yeah.
Okay, no, these are interesting metrics. I think that my understanding of consciousness is more of an emergent property of experience, more so than it is. I would have to reread. It's been a while since
I think
read up on
people
this.
assume
You know what I love is
that
you
abortion
said
debates are like interesting, and I gotta be honest. Abortion debates are some of the most boring conversations I've ever seen in my life, because what it always boils down to this: you just always disagree about where the line starts, and it's completely arbitrary.
Yeah, both sides of it are, but because the same, like if you use that life argument, your body is still doing things when you're dead.
True.
There's still a process of like a very like long biological process of decomposition. Like parts of your body are still alive when you die. So.
True.
When do you think life begins? That was your question. I love how framing changes everything. Watch. Ask me now.
Tim, when does life begin?
I think it was when proteins formed and it started self-replicating in the primordial. Oh, you mean conception?
Right.
You see, like it's interesting how framing changes everything.
To me, it's more, I guess, for me, because like any cell in our body is alive. There is life and DNA in any bit of skin off my fingertip.
I wasn't meaning
So-
to poke at you or anything.
No,
was just,
no,
like,
I know.
The
I would-
framing is
so
interesting.
I would only say to me-
when does a life worthy of protection begin?
That's a difficult question. To me,
that's a better way to word it.
To me, that has to be a legal question because protection has to be arbitered by an entity, and it can't be. And for me, that would probably be at birth. I've heard people make convincing philosophical arguments that there are times after birth when you're not even a person, and I've heard people make convincing arguments for conception. But if you're talking about a legal entity, the birth thing seems to be the line that's the easiest to distinguish. And there are other legal concerns as well. But this is an issue that I think I always support like a pro-choice argument. The philosophy behind it is something I'm a little more
I'm just
open to.
So is it more on the size of the...
By the way, for everybody who doesn't know who's with me today, it is LonerBox, which you can look up on YouTube. He just released what is most likely a wonderful video on Nick Fuentes and why LonerBox. What is it? Do you like him? Are you for him? I'm not for. I don't know yet. What's your position on Nick? You pro or against? I'll take a silence.
me?
Yeah. I'm asking.
I thought you were asking chat.
No, I was asking you, Loner.
Pro or against?
Yeah, there's
No,
a
I'm
lot
very-
of hesitation.
very,
You have to think about it a lot. You have to
I'll
think
leave it.
about
I'll leave it. Yeah. I'll leave chat to fill in the gaps.
Yeah. I will tell you. I believe he's against. You have to watch the video to find out, though.
being,
You'll never
or
know.
the level of development of the being, or the environment of the being, or the degree of dependency? Which one do you think out of those things is the reason why you say birth? I'm just
I
curious.
think the degree of dependency is legally worthwhile, but for consciousness, I think it's more about it being an emergent property of experience.
So is it okay then if we just basically pull the plug on all the people that are kind of comatose and cucumbers on machines? They really don't have self-consciousness and they're very dependent.
Well, I mean, legally we do believe that because if you have
Oh, it's very
legal,
tricky in the courts.
It is, but it's not the same as murdering a person. If there's conservatorship over a person who's brain dead, there are instances where you will be allowed to pull the plug.
You can't do so without an arbiter, though. You can't just call in and say, just pull the plug. That is murder.
You can just yank it, of course.
You have to get approval and process. Yeah.
But it does indicate that legal.
To be clear, though, with abortion, it's not like you just stand there and then just fall face first on your belly, and that's how abortions are done. There's usually a process that goes with abortion in the United States.
And morally, there is ambiguity with regards to the
No,
relationship.
but it shows that
between
there's
right
an
to life.
arbiter, though. That you have to go through a system of checks. I didn't mean to derail Tim.
I want to make sure we can get to as many questions
Of course.
as possible.
Yeah.
That was great. Camilla Mamani says, WTF, a libertarian socialist is like a meat eater vegan.
Libertarianism was actually a left-leaning ideology. It was co-opted in the early 20th centuries by capitalists, but actually before that, libertarianism was exclusively in the purview of socialists, and I believe what they believed, that freedom is the greatest human good as long as it doesn't infringe upon others, and that the best way to achieve that freedom is through democracy. We have political democracy, flawed as it is. Economic democracy is something we should also strive for.
I'll tell you this, left libertarian quadrant is the hardest quadrant to be in. You have the only persuasion tactics. The only, if you're a left libertarian, which exists, you're basically saying, I like socialism. Now I have to convince people that it's the right thing and they'll agree with me. And people just won't. People won't.
I find left libertarians less threatening to the.
What? What was the point he just made?
I don't know.
I don't even. What? That was fucking not. That was just complete nonsense. Being a left libertarian's hard because you have to convince people, and people disagree.
What are the stats on young Americans and socialism versus capitalism? Don't they generally favor socialism to capitalism?
Tim, I mean, how about you convince me of a 49 state landslide, Tim? How about you convince me of that?
I think there's a really easy way you could answer that question. Is you just say like, well, the definition that you go by socialism is worker-owned means of production, whereas people tend to think it's state-owned. Well, worker-owned you can try to imply that via the state, but people get it the other way around. It's quite an easy thing to
bingo.
To make.
Also, this is a really good freeze frame of Charlie Kirk.
It is. It's that like perfect, like
almost
mix,
a duck face.
That perfect 50-50 blend of like arrogance and dumbfoundedness. I love it.
Brilliant. I feel like he's about to spit all over me while he starts yelling at me. You know.
The American way of life.
Oh, thank you.
Because you have a general distaste for authoritarianism.
Well, for what it's worth.
The right has money. They're like, well, you won't agree with me, but I can give you money. And they're like,
the left does too. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just want to say, for what it's worth, there are some people who call themselves socialists who I actually think would agree probably more with you than with me. Like people who support China, for example. China's not socialist. It's a rampant capitalist state.
It's a cronyist state is really what it is.
Right. Well, I mean, whatever you want to call it, it's certainly not what I want, you know. So there are people who would defend that, and I can't help but think, like, okay, these are conservative.
I can't wait for the clips for the next like 3 months of like, look at Vaush agreeing with Charlie Kirk about China. The imperialist left has struck and once again. Can't wait for the Caleb Maupin, fucking Hakeem streams. It's gonna be great.
What would you call them? Traditionalist social positions, and you defend, you know, a strong state with a strong common will towards the betterment of the state and a free market. I don't know. You know, maybe that'll be what would they call that? The Red-Brown Alliance? No, I'm joking.
In a way.
So I've got a question for Charlie.
Sure.
I'm not sure. I'm not familiar. Are you familiar with Alden's theory?
No.
You're not? Oh, okay. Then I guess I won't answer that question then.
Oh no. God! Almost got him. Almost got him. Almost got him.
Because he would.
So close.
Because he's one of the ones who would say yes. You know?
Yeah, it would have to be in a heated debate, though. If he just says that and he just says no, I think Vaush would have had to bring it up. Like, well, of course, since you know a lot about critical race theory, like, what about what Alden's theory had to say? Like, do you agree with Alden's theory, the critical race theorist? You would have to do something like that to get him to do it. So close.
All right, and then the next question would be for both of you is, what is the single biggest political issue for each of you? And Charlie, if you want to answer first.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question.
I'm sorry.
For those who don't know, Alden's theory is a made-up thing that people throw out there to see if people just pretend to know more than they don't. So if you'd be like, what do you think of Alden's theory? Have you read about Alden's theory? Then someone says yes, and he's like, I just made that up. Fuck you. So basically, it's a meme.
All right, for 2022.
Oh, like, I could take that any way, I guess, right? You know, what should Republicans run on, I guess? Or like, what is the biggest issue? Yeah, I mean, man, it's... I'd say the way we do elections in our country is definitely up there. Big tech is massive. Immigration is huge. But I think even something more fundamental that I think we almost achieved it tonight, which is that we're about to tear this country apart. Mm-hmm. And I think dialogue is something that is so beautiful and is so complex and almost spiritual in nature that if we don't have dialogue with people that you fundamentally disagree with, then there's really not a middle ground until you start ripping each other apart. And I'm really afraid of that.
He's the leader of TPUSA, just to be clear.
What's your what's the biggest issue of 2022?
I agree that the political rift is almost insurmountable seeming. The last time we had one this bad was pre-Civil War, and we didn't really fix it. We just had a civil war, and people were still mad after. So I hope that doesn't happen. I don't think we're going to have a civil war, by the way. There are some people.
It's true, though.
I think
Reformation was a failure.
At the end of the day, there's a big difference between the problems we're
sorry.
told to care about and the problems we're willing to fight about. And I'm not entirely sure if I know where those lines are, but I know there's a difference. With regards to what I'd care about, for me, it has to be climate change. I know a lot of people roll their eyes at this stuff, but like you can take a look at the polar ice caps. You can take a look at the weather disasters we've been having, increasing both in frequency and intensity. This isn't look, think of it this way, okay? I believe in American industry, all right? It's a little too late for us to be first comers, but if we really wanted to, we could subsidize the hell out of green energy. You think we're doing it now? Triple that, okay? Really lay the groundwork. In 20 years, we'll be selling the rest of the world the energy they'll need to survive.
You know what really breaks my heart is the video I made before the actual Green New Deal, talking about how we needed a Green New Deal, and then AOC's Green New Deal was like equity and college and healthcare, and then the botched FAQ, and I was like, I'm talking about why are we spending money on war when we could be researching green technologies and more efficient energy?
Can I add the serfs to the call? Would you care if I did that?
That's fine.
Okay, dope.
You need to tell me if this is TOS, Dylan, that I'm fucking drinking spirits on the camera. I don't think it is, but I've.
You mean alcohol? Is it alcohol?
Yeah.
Okay, you're allowed to drink. Well, you're 21 or above, right?
Yeah.
Okay, old man.
Too far above.
Old man.
I'm 30.
By the way, can I say something? I'll never have a chance to say this. Your promo for the event, for the Rumble, was the best out of everybody's. It was my favorite. I liked it a lot.
Oh, thank you. Well, I can't wait to show you the next one. I'm going to come for you for the job.
Second. I lost my middle window where you were. Where'd you go? Damn. There we go. Hey, how's it going, Lance? Hello?
How are y'all doing? Can you hear me?
I'm doing good.
Hello.
I'm doing good. So we're still reviewing the after questions. We haven't finished yet because we did a lot of pausing.
Okay.
Okay, so has the stream ended? Is it over officially?
It is done. Sorry, someone just roboted me, so I just had to hear the beanie hides the tinfoil, which hides the bald spot.
Beautiful.
But yes, what I was going to say is that my initial review of the whole thing would have to be that I thought Vaush came out incredibly strong in the start when they were speaking about vaccines. I thought Charlie Kirk looked absolutely ridiculous.
He did. He got mad.
He got mad, and he came out so hot at the very start of it, and just ended up looking like an absolute clown.
I think so. I would say that his best part was the vaccine part. I think he did good during the intro of critical race theory. I think he did good for the most of this debate. I would say the two sections where he was weakest was probably during the abortion question, which we're not finished yet. We're probably going to finish this last 10 minutes. And when he started talking about the history of the United States, when he got into like the founding and like around slavery, I don't think he properly responded. I don't know if Vaush has actually a very in-depth like knowledge about like America's founding and like the beliefs of the United States and like when it comes to like its founding, the founding fathers. Because I mean, I feel like a lot of people just like know some basic stuff from high school and like that's enough, but like not a lot of people have like actually taken the time to like read the Federalist Papers or like go past that.
Yeah, and there was a couple moments there where I think it's going to be some easy clips for Charlie Kirk. Like I think when he told him, he didn't even know who the founder of the 1619 Project was. That's just an easy clip that Charlie's going to be like, "Look how I bodied this socialist with facts and logic and stuff like that." Right?
I don't know if he's. I wonder how he's going to package this after, because I think right now, from how I'm listening to it, he's packaging it as what a polite discussion. Like this is what we need to do to help America. Or will he like right after be like, "I just destroyed," like a 180 and like temperament might be a little bit too much of a jolt considering I just heard him say like, "This is what we need more of in the United States." You know?
Yeah, that was like the first thing he said. When he's like, that was after the first little back and forth they had, where Charlie Kirk just like congratulated everyone on having such a civil discussion. But yeah, I think maybe it would have been better to notice that, like, of course he was going to bring up 1619 and that whole, like, because that was his thing, 1776, and probably could have read some like spark notes on old philosophers for Charlie Kirk.
Well, no, I think he was just flexing, and he does it way worse near the end, where he starts going into like what he knows about Hegelian philosophy and stuff like that. But I think at the end of the day, when it came to like Charlie Kirk versus Vaush's initial performance and them being civil and everything, I have come to respect Vaush's style in these debates so much.
Yes.
Like I initially went into his debate with Tim Pool, for example, wanting blood. I was so thirsty. You know, it was like straight out of There Will Be Blood. You know, like give me the blood, Eli. Like I wanted blood on the dance floor. I wanted the whole place to be ravaged. And at the same time, there's so much more utility to speaking calm, concisely, and just appearing to be completely rational, especially to like the outside audience. Like I don't know if y'all saw, but the Groypers were just mauling like crazy in the chat.
It's great. If you piss them off, you're doing something good. And the thing is, I think people need to realize that. I think a lot of people are like, he should have done this or that. He's not. This isn't just like some random Twitch debate with some caller or something. This is in front of a massive audience. Not only is Charlie Kirk there, so he's bringing his audience, but then you got Tim Pool's audience, right? This is somewhere where you not only need to be perceived as intelligent and correct, but also like likable. And you can't always seem likable by just being like, Charlie Kirk, your face small, Lamau. As much as I would like him at the end to have been, I have one final question, why is your face so small? Like, that type of stuff would not play well in a debate. Would you be comfortable if we finished the last 10 minutes of this? My chat is begging me to do so.
Yeah. Can you turn on your camera?
Yeah, I'm sharing it right now.
Okay.
Awesome.
You're not sharing
Thorium
it on...
salt
in the call we're doing, I'm doing share screen, so is it not picking up?
Oh, we've got your screen. I can see that. Your camera.
We don't have your camera though.
On, my camera. Okay, one second.
Yeah.
There you go. Good.
We can't see your pretty face. There you go.
That's the first time I get to see you in this whole thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Finally. I didn't mean to do that.
Reactors, things like that, get fusion to ignite. Instead, we get this like racial equity garbage.
Oh, also, I gotta say, I was not expecting that you. Today is the first day I heard about the Lord Southern debate. So I'm happy that you messaged me because you would have been like, Dylan, where are you? I'm like, what? I've just been so fucking confused.
I am astounded no one reached out to you because
someone did, but I never responded.
Yeah,
it was an unresponded to DM.
Okay.
So I'm very happy you responded to me because like, yeah, that's massive. I think you're gonna do really good tomorrow, man. You're really good on
on Thursday, but I'm very excited.
It's Thursday.
Yeah, it's
you
Thursday.
You messaged me. You told me it was tomorrow.
It's Thursday at 3 p.m.
3 p.m. PDT, so you're like Pacific Standard Time.
Yes.
Okay.
Does that still work?
Got it. I gotta delete a tweet then. Fuck. Okay. Because you told me it was tomorrow, so I gotta. Right. No.
My bad.
Destiny retweeted it too. I'm gonna lose the retweet. Fuck. Okay. Well, it is what it is.
What's the topic?
I had this.
It's gonna be as like the burning down of Catholic churches, restorative.
Yeah, so the Indian residential schools, the burning of the Catholic churches, and the idea of restorative justice in regards to both.
Okay.
Fuck. Oh God, we'll lose the retweet. No. Oh well. You know what? Can't always get what you want.
I do like the Green New Deal. But I had this problem too with that teachers union board, the one that affirmed CRT, said they're going to
the National Education Association.
Yeah, it was also a union, or maybe it was
NEA.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's the largest teacher union in the country.
Because first of all, what they said wasn't CRT.
But sure. 1 second. Let me see if I can turn it up a little bit. I can use the volume mixer.
But I'll take that up with them if I ever. They did. And still, they got that wrong. So if I ever argue with them,
they mean what we've been talking, wokeism.
Yeah, I just, oh man, it's because the theory is cool. You know, you wouldn't agree with it, but it's interesting.
I want to say something about this really quick.
I do not think it's cool, and
the theory is awesome. It's like the theory of communism. We should have a philosophy class where you learn about critical race theory. Teaching it in practice to children is a different idea.
So I actually, in response to my absolute failure in giving you the adequate response in our last conversation, did pull up Critical Race Theory by Kimberly Crenshaw and actually read what she was talking about. And I think the idea of the oppressed versus oppressor in race is a horrible thing when we're trying to get away from that. And I had a conversation with an actual racist recently And the ideas to me are absolutely nonsensical to base things on race. Coming from an actual racist who was advocating for the same things in that book, I was like, so you're happy with this stuff? Like, well, no, because the wrong side's in charge. And then I had to explain to them, like, I do not see the world the way you do. And he says, well, that's the trouble with race mixing. And that's, and no, but that's exact. This is what I see when I talk to people who are in favor of critical race theory's core ideology and white nationalists. They tell me the same garbage in different ways.
Look,
I mean, no. The thing is, what policies, like, okay. So when we think about, like, the idea that, well, the CRT people are doing the same thing as the white nationalists. Well, number one, there's never been a CRT inspired shooting, I don't believe. I don't believe anybody was like, oh, I learned in kindergarten about CRT and now I'm like, that's not going on. So that would be one major difference I would put out there. And another thing is, the prescriptions from the rhetoric of what these two different groups, even though it's just a framework of examining stuff, is completely different when we talk about what white nationalists advocate for, which is the mass deportation of black people. I don't think I've ever seen any CRT scholar ever actually advocate for, like, the mass deportation of all whites or anything like that, unless they want to get into, like, I don't know, ethno-separatism, but, like, that's totally different.
Yeah. Well, from the very get-go, Charlie Kirk refused to define it properly and then decided he wanted to debate wokeism for the rest of it. So they never actually really discussed CRT. And it's that idea that, conservatives consistently push this, that CRT is about teaching everyone that white people are racist. That's what it is. That's like the idea they've conjured around this, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's pretty amazing that Tim Pool basically mentioned the fact that he failed to define CRT the first time. And now he said, well, now that I know that, I went and read Kimberly Crenshaw and found out that CRT is when you take oppressor oppressed and make it about white and black people, which is just the same regurgitated cultural Marxist. Like,
is he admitting that he didn't know what critical race theory was originally in his first debate?
He actually said that. He just said he did. He'll just say, "Oh yeah, I remember the time when." Sorry, I couldn't define it properly last time, and then I went to read about it and just came out with the same answer again.
Debate or conversation without knowing how objectively embarrassing his response was. Like you can't. There's no way to try and play that any other way.
Bro.
Always been a firm supporter of the idea that the ideas should be what's criticized, not like the people who make them. Sometimes, for example, people will make fun of me because I talk on class issues and I'm from Beverly Hills, and I accept the jibing. It's fine. But I think anyone can speak in this stuff. To be fair, this is idpol, and everyone does it to an extent. Candace Owens will deflect criticisms of racism by saying she's black. We've all seen people do this. The only thing I wanted to say, because I have to move back like 6 points here, is that with regards to the teachers board, you spoke on, and the Green New Deal, I sometimes feel like the left is a little bit bad when it comes to mixing all their causes. If they, speaking of separatism, if they kept things a little bit more stringent, a little more focused, maybe they could get people to agree on some of it. But if every push for climate change is also every other progressive note, and every push for racial equality is every other progressive note, it feels like it's like an all or nothing package, and I think that can put some people off.
I wanted to just clarify quickly and to inject my idpol, as you mentioned, Candace Owens would do it. I would, and a lot of people are always mentioning, Tim Pool mentions he's mixed race, and I'm like, maybe that's why you'll understand when people are writing like whiteness this and people of color that. I'm like, I don't exist in that world because I've been discriminated against by all of these people. And when that person said to me, the perils of mixed racing or race mixing, he's talking about me personally, saying I don't understand the tribalist worldview of racialists and identitarians because I've never experienced what it means to be in a racial tribe. And you know what? I think he's right, and that's why I love the classical liberal view of opposition to racism, judging people based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin, because I see this.
I believe it was a famous philosopher, Joe Rogan, who said, "Stop calling yourself a classical liberal. Just call yourself a conservative already. God damn it." Famous philosopher Joe Rogan.
World that's being built critical of whiteness, that includes me, but then it's always the negative. Every experience I've ever had, be it from white nationalists or from critical race theorists, is that you are bad for whatever reason. I do not want to live in a world where race is the predeterminant policymaker or factor on these things. And you know what? For the progressives to come out right now and claim civil rights and say we did all these things and then tell me I now face that detriment, I'm like, you know what, man, my grandparents, civil rights activists, race mixers, my actual parents also mix in races and stuff. And I'm like, I can now look at the progressives who are putting a detriment on my life and insulting me no matter what I do and the white nationalists who vandalized my home as a child. And it's the world that you're taking credit for that you're trying now to put a detriment for people like me.
Well, it could be a matter of perception as well. I've read a lot of like academic critiques of whiteness, which isn't white people. It's a sort of
That's not true at all.
Well, it's an academic term to describe affectations associated with white people culturally, more so than the actual act of being.
But black
white.
and brown literally means black and brown.
If there was a critique of
it's
blackness,
I would never call my parents
if it was
that's so weird.
That's very. I have never referred. Okay,
They were, but that's very strange.
In no relationship I've ever been, and I've never dated a white person. I just don't live around white people. Have I ever been like, yeah, me and my race mixer, right? Like I've like me and my fellow misogynist, right? Us, yeah, we're a degenerate couple. Oh yeah, we're really cute, right? No, you don't. That's not how people talk. We just like I guess the closest like would be like mixed race couple, but race mixers. Oof.
Yeah.
Academic term used in that way, then I would think of it the same way. But since there isn't such a term, I would have to be critical. If you look, regardless of the etymology of the term, in concept, it's meant to be like you know the term toxic masculinity.
Yeah, I've heard it once or twice.
A couple times, you know. When I read stuff like that, it's interesting stuff, you know. I don't think of this all men are bad, all masculinity is bad. It's more of a salient critique of certain cultural trends. Now, the problem that I have is essentialism. Some people will take this on both the left and the right, and they'll think of it as an individual critique, which it should never be used as. If I were to say something like, imagine I'm reading MLK back in 1953, you know? MLK had some things to say about white people back during his era. He would say that, you know, the whites of this era are unconcerned with the plight of black people, except he didn't say black people. And this is a non-essentialist.
He thinks he's making a good point here, but remember, Charlie Kirk said MLK is a mixed bag. So, it's going to be hard to... why would he say that? That's such a stupid thing to say. Even just optically. Why not just, like, I don't know, continue like, the specter that, like, people pretend to, like care about what MLK had to say. Why would he say... I'm still baffled that he said that.
I think a lot of Vaush's debate prep videos were him talking about how MLK was more than just... judge me by the content of my character.
And so they had to say that because MLK had a lot of things to say that were a little bit more lefty for his feelings. Because I guess he had to admit that he can't play pretend. Okay, go.
He didn't believe in racial essentialism. He wouldn't go up to an individual white person and judge them negatively for that. But he understood that as a cultural trend, this is indeed a pattern he recognized.
So massive group stereotyping.
Well, massive group stereotyping that's been done by every civil rights movement to have ever existed. Maybe the issue isn't the stereotyping so much as the way it's being applied and used. If the stereotyping is, I notice there's a big difference in abolitionist thoughts between white and black people in Southern America in 1852, maybe that's the kind of stereotyping that can be used for good. Also, stereotyping by definition is assuming characteristics of an individual because of their part of a group.
That's close to what MLK was saying when he said white liberals. I mean, that's...
You wouldn't apply it to an individual, though.
No.
I mean, I've made comments about groups, people who play League of Legends. Degenerates, the lot of them. But I know people who play League of Legends, and when I talk about people who play League of Legends, I'm not talking about them.
Look, I remember like watching earlier today this like anti-vax video where somebody tried to be like, I don't need to wear a mask, the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And like it just baffled me. But if there's any group that civil rights should not apply to, it is League of Legends players.
Yes.
I know that
they're not a protected group.
Yes. So do you believe we should
no one is born a League of Legends player.
Do you believe we should add an amendment to just to specify, to be very clear, that the 1964 Civil Rights Act does not apply to League of Legends players? I think that's reasonable.
Yay.
Correct. Okay, good. Wonderful.
I'm talking about people who play League of Legends.
So I want to ask you about the climate change thing. Mm-hmm. What do you think is a bigger threat, climate change or China?
To the world or to
climate change? Done. Easy.
America.
To you, the world, America.
I think it's still climate change. I think China's probably going to replace us as the dominant power. I'm not really happy about that because we're more democratic than they are in terms of our political structure. If they had a better democracy, I might favor them over us because I don't really care about national allegiances. But we are more democratic than them. So The climate change thing is an issue that'll affect us all, though. The big one's going to be climate refugees. There are a lot of low-lying coastal communities that are going to be inhospitable to life in about 40 years, and they're going to move out into populated areas, and there's going to be border conflicts and war. It's going to be tough.
We're not going to be able to get to every single
I'm
Super
so
Chatter
sorry.
question.
No,
It's no big deal, because I think it's more important that you guys are having these arguments. So I'm not going to interrupt you when you're actually debating the ideas. That's the point. But a lot of people did Super Chat. Just know that you guys, Super Chat's greatly appreciated. There's a whole lot of them.
Yeah. We love you.
So, but I've got one critical for you, Vaush.
Hit me up.
Nasho Nabo says, Vaush, as a black person who grew up in majority white areas, those conversations are very demoralizing to be a part of. I don't doubt your intentions, but it's best to speak to people affected by your ideas before trying to implement them as our white savior.
I don't appreciate the white savior critique, because that's just the opposite end of IDPOL, isn't it? Saying that I'm less inclined to talk about these issues because I'm white. Like, that's kind of like the opposite thing.
I agree. I think address the idea.
I agree with that too.
Yeah.
But with regards to like the implementation here, obviously, like social problems like this, addressing them is going to be contentious no matter what. I don't know if there's a way to do this, to fix any problem, even the most obvious problems. Today we think slavery, obviously that's bad, but clearly there was some disagreement. With issues like this, there's going to be disagreement. I don't know if there's a perfect way to handle it. Anything is going to mix people up. I have to balance that concern with the hope that in the future people become more accepting of these issues. A good example of that would be like gender stuff, for example. In terms of like, if you look at it generationally, from boomers to Gen Z people are like 30 times as likely to know a person who identifies as trans or non-binary or whatever. And for that reason, conversations on those subjects have become significantly easier just because people have been exposed to the concept. Maybe in time this will be easier. Maybe we'll all fail and it won't be. But I am sorry that these conversations are difficult.
All right, let's see. Well, I got to be honest. The overwhelming majority of the Super Chats are just saying thank you for having a conversation.
Those are the overwhelming majority ones that I copied.
No. I was looking at it.
They are,
I thought you would have all the questions, so I was like, okay, I can see everyone very excited. That's why I read the first one. And some people have pointed out that in a conversational format, you are both less derisive and divisive in your arguments.
All YouTubers should
try to be
take
nice
account
in
of
my
that.
streams.
So here's an interesting and kind of specific question. Joshua Alley asks, should courts decide cases based on rule of law and precedents, or decide each case based entirely on rationality and morality?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it needs to be a balance. Precedents definitely matters, especially in the American system. And the idea of the whole third branch of government really kind of came into question with Marbury versus Madison, with the first Supreme Court Justice of the United States, John Jay, I believe, who was one of the co-authors of the Federalist Papers. Precedent is important, but it's not everything. And this is a super important thing that conservatives need to talk more about, which I think you would agree with, Vaush, is that precedents can be really bad. Dred Scott was awful precedent. It was really bad. It was 7 Democrat U.S. Supreme Court justices, 2 Democrats, that said black people were not people. And that precedent was in law, basically, for many decades until it was eventually...
I could say a lot of things about Charlie Kirk, but you want to know one positive thing I could say about him? He has more balls than Steven Crowder, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just easy peasy. He doesn't have to come here with gun holsters and dodge a bunch of people. Like, he debated Sam Cedar. He debated Hassan Piker. He debated Vaush. He's somebody who actually debates. He preps. He probably has media teams, like doing everything possible to make sure he succeeds, but 100% more ballsy than Steven Crowder.
Great
Well, Charlie Kirk is the intellectual and Crowder's the muscle. You know, Charlie Kirk's a lover, not a fire.
True.
Oh no,
Actually
Vaush,
reversed.
what a nightmare.
I mean, look at him. I mean, he has such a kissable face. I mean, if you can somehow like hit his actual face, you know, it's kind of difficult.
Because of the Brown versus Board of Education. But precedent also is helpful so that you don't turn the courts into another legislative branch, right? So the courts are supposed to be very unique, and they're supposed to be deliberative, process-oriented, say no to more cases than they say yes to. And so the question is, where do you strike that balance? Alexander Hamilton predicted that it would be mostly based on public opinion, that judges are still people too, and they're going to look to public opinion. This goes to more of a Democratic argument than a Republic-style argument. I will defend precedent more than overturning, But I definitely think the court has gone wrong in a variety of different decisions in the last 60 years. And I think that what happens is you have very activist decisions, and then they decide not to look at it again under a conservative belief of precedent.
I think I would lean more towards precedent, though, as well, though maybe for a different reason. I think it's because we need accountability. The problem is if judicial decisions are entirely at the discretion of the judge, it becomes very difficult to correct legal trends through anything other than appoint better judges, which can be an incredibly long-standing process. And even then, it's a crapshoot? I mean, you don't know everyone's opinion on everything. That being said, I do think that to an extent, judges are legislators. This is actually a critical legal theory perspective, which fed into CRT, the idea that within the bounds of discretion, judges will almost always side with the political biases they have. And that's not like a dig on any side, that's just what we are. That judges who identify as liberal or conservative will overwhelmingly side with each other in the plurality of cases because our biases do inform us. I think that we have to recognize that's a reality, but we do have to constrain the process through judicial precedent, or otherwise it's just throwing darts at a wall.
I just want to point out, one of the super chats noted that we were trending.
Oh, is that right?
And so I'm like,
on Twitter or on YouTube?
On Twitter, but it says content creator Vaush debates with radio talk show host Charlie Kirk on Twitch.
Oh,
we're not on
Twitch.
On
Twitch?
That's Amazon propaganda.
That's us, baby. Okay, that's us. They wanted to conclude us in the headline. Okay, so that's us. We are number one. Okay, not once again. Twitch is number one. Get out of here. Another W for the Twitchers.
On YouTube.
Sorry.
What do we call ourselves? Twitchers? What? Did I just call ourselves Twitchers?
Yeah, sure. Twitchies.
I just thought it was funny that
Twitchies.
Well, at least we're trending.
No, but it's like how did you get that wrong? Unless somebody's screen grabbing.
It's the Twitter. Hey, listen. After the Twitter trending title descriptor had to spend like 6 weeks in a row describing everything that happened with those Minecraft YouTubers, I feel like this is they're a little bit off their game.
Maybe somebody's restreaming it on Twitch or whatever. You know, just copy.
I don't know what he's talking about. I don't know. He's like,
put off their game.
I mean, like, I would never.
Maybe somebody's restreaming it on Twitch or whatever. You know, it's just copyright infringement. I'm just kidding. It is.
I know that Shu did a stream commentating on us.
Oh really?
Oh come on! I'm right here. Damn. That's deadly, man.
Maybe that was on Twitch.
All right, so we got one from Dylan Perrick. He says, do you guys think philosophy could be taught instead of CRT, like Plato's allegory and the cave? In my opinion, stuff like this helps people better understand one another individually.
I'm hugely in favor of more theoretical classes being taught to high schoolers. Philosophy, sociology, and I don't know what the modern equivalent of like finances or home ec would be, but something like that. Kids graduate, they don't know anything about anything when it comes to managing their finances, which is weird.
We agree.
Because that will destroy them if they don't. Like, why don't we teach them that? Philosophy, everyone should be learned on, just flat out. That's just, I think that's a moral necessity. And when it comes to sociology, I'm not even talking like left-leaning inclinations on that. I mean like the basic ability to read like statistical information on what's going on, because for the rest of their lives, they're going to be asked to vote based on political information they don't have the education to understand.
Yeah, I mean, philosophy comes from a Greek word, love of wisdom, philos, sophos, and we definitely don't have that right now in our country. And yeah, I'm a big fan of teaching it. I just want to teach it correctly. I'd say a lot less Nietzsche and Kant and Hume and a lot more Aristotle and Locke.
Yeah, this guy knows about Hobbes and such. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
He's very big brain. I like all the big words.
And Aquinas and Augustine. And I think the problem is, though, if philosophy, if not, so Plato would say this. So Plato would say, I'm not going to teach philosophy until you could do advanced Euclidean geometry. It was his rule. Now, why would he have that rule? He's like, if you can't think rationally and be able to determine good ideas from bad ideas in the empirical, I'm not going to even get close to teaching you about the allegory of the cave or the ship or Plato's Republic or the forms. So I think there's actually something to that if you introduce philosophy too early.
By the way, that's stupid, by the way, to be clear. A lot of people just suck at math. Like, I can't do math. I can't. I'm sorry. I seen the numbers and I just malfunction.
You can create kind of one-liner philosophers that think they understand the entire world. And it really goes to that expression, the more I know, the more I realize how little I knew when I thought I knew it all. That's the kind of that idea of daring to know.
The corollary is true too. You know, the scientists who worked in the Manhattan Project, many of them said they cultivated inspiration from religion and from philosophy, completely outside the bound of physics, but it got their brain a jogging, you know?
So I'd love to talk to you about religion and just like where you think that fits into a functioning
we should
society.
definitely talk about religion. This would be really, really interesting. Why don't we?
Is that it? Is that basically the rest of it? They're done now?
They give some thank yous and some,
thank you everybody. Please, everybody, go worship us. Yeah, got it. So, okay, I think that's basically it, right? We could wrap it up here for watching it and just talk about it.
Yeah.
I was waiting for somebody. Okay, I can be the man of action if need be. Okay, I'll. Okay, everybody, we're done. No questions. Okay. So
I was expecting a much more of like the fucking Lord Voldemort vibe from Tim Pool. He was very well behaved in that interaction.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised at how well that actually went. Just generally when it comes to like a discourse perspective, I expected a lot less when it comes to actually like having decent dialogue. So I am decently surprised. I don't know if I'm surprised. I mean, would I have enjoyed more Bloodsporty stuff? It would have been funny, but I actually do think this was generally more productive and better for Vaush. I think Vaush performed very well generally.
Yeah, I think so. I think there was just like, I don't know. I had something to say, but I forgot what it was.
I don't got much more to say besides like Vaush did very well. The only areas where I think he didn't do very well was maybe like abortion, because that wasn't really a pre-planned topic. Some basic American history, and
what do you think he did poorly on in the abortion part of it? Out of curiosity.
I think that like it's really easy to look good when somebody says my point for, because it's really like it's concise. Conception starts at like life starts at conception. It feels like comfortable. It feels like an easy click for a lot of people, and it's hard to respond to it.
I thought he was going to say life begins at D's. I was like, that's where he's going to drop it.
You know what? It would have been smarter to do that, and that's why you're debating Lawrence Arthur and I'm not. So the thing is, it's like it matches in your head. It makes sense. Like, oh, it makes sense that life begins at conception, and you know, most people aren't okay with 8-month abortion, like having abortion at 8 months or 9 months. Like that seems unreasonable. So what if we're uncomfortable with that? It feels like being uncomfortable with all of it would make sense. And so it's hard to respond to that generally. So this is, I would say it's like rhetorically, it's very difficult to respond to that. And I haven't seen somebody really do it effectively yet. I think he did as much as he can, but it's also like he didn't have any prep beforehand. And Charlie was peppering him with questions.
I think a good argument with what Charlie was doing with like life begins at conception, because he said the reason he comes to that conclusion is because of DNA in cells. Well, that's like, okay, that begins at conception, but that doesn't end at death. It doesn't end at what we call death. When you die, there are still cells alive in your body, and there's still DNA, and there's still replication happening. So I think it's like that distinction between life and consciousness is probably useful to bring in, just as a quick response.
What I think they like to do on the right is they like to use this as a topic because it allows them to act as if they have the moral high ground for a change, which in this case, it's like, we don't want to murder babies, which everyone would agree with, you know, like even if you're on the left, you're like, yeah, obviously it's not an ideal scenario to have that happen. What I think leftists
in most situations, I'm against baby murder. Yeah. Unless it's a really ugly baby.
But what I think leftists and even libs need to do is to stop ceding the ground and to start talking about it in terms of bodily autonomy. Like, you are advocating for basically forced birth. That's what you're doing. You are telling women and trans men that they have to engage in forced birth. And that's how we should be reframing the argument. So this happens to be like any other argument. It's about bodily autonomy at the end of the day, rather than try to cede the ground and say we're going to talk about babies' rights, for example.
I think you can even go further. But yeah, that's like, because they always try to be on this kind of philosophical ground, which is really the hardest one, because every line you draw will be arbitrary, whether it's life or consciousness. It's always arbitrary. But in practical terms, it's like you're not anti-abortion, you're just anti-safe abortion. And as for pro-life, it's like, you know, these are often people who are very anti. Like Charlie Kirk was railing against welfare for most of that conversation when it came up. So it's like you don't really care what happens after the baby is born.
Yeah.
In whatever circumstances.
I also thought it was very difficult for him to deal with Vaush's statement of, I think Vaush said at some point, if a man is born in the middle, if a man is in the middle of the desert with no food, no water, no nothing, but no restrictions from government, is he free? And Charlie said, well, no, I don't think so. And then he had to kind of dance around that fact. Well, it's very different over there in a modern American society, da-da-da. But basically, he gave Vaush like the foundation for what he wanted to say, is that if people cannot live with some level of basic prosperity, then they're not free. You need a certain level of economic freedom, which is like the basis of like Vaush's like argument for socialism.
Yeah, I'd agree with all that.
I mean, I wish I had more to complain about, honestly. I don't. I just think this was like a really good showing. I think he did very well.
I think one of the big questions is, what is it going to do in terms of moving the compass? Like, yes, Vaush will get, maybe 3,000 more subs. Will Charlie Kirk or Tim Pool? I'm not sure. But what is it going to do in terms of pushing leftism and leftist ideas forward? Is really the big question.
Well, I think we got some pretty funny quotes out of it, like MLK was a mixed bag in his statements on the Confederacy, which, I mean, is always useful to like see your, I guess, your political opponents mess up. But I think the audience that the Vaush's performance and how likable he came off, how he presented libertarian socialism, how he was able to, and this is really important, how he was able to show how important vaccines are and how safe vaccines are. That is very important as the Delta variant continues to become a bigger and bigger threat. I mean, I talk constantly about how last month, I think it was 2 months ago now, 120 people died in my state from COVID. Tragedy. Every single one was unvaccinated. The odds of, like I remember, like, Charlie was talking about all these, like, well, what about this death or this death? Or, like, trying to play up to 7,000. But if you look at 7,000 or whatever number, which I don't even believe that number, to be completely clear, because the CDC, I believe, released a different number, but that's out of 163 million. Like that. I mean, if you gave 163 million Americans like gummy vitamins, I'm sure like 10,000 of them might choke on them to death. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with gummy vitamins. I mean, I believe like the death is 0.001%, and hospitalization is 0.004%.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's why it absolutely infuriates me when you see those like news headlines where it's like people who are vaccinated are still catching COVID. What's the deal? And then like that's the fucking clickbait, And I see those every day now, and I'm like, you fucking ghouls. That's so irresponsible. Irresponsible of you to lead with that, because people share that shit all over social media. They don't read past the headlines.
My father has lung cancer, and he called me and told me that basically he was like, people still catch COVID with it, so like whatever. And he has lung cancer. He is literally, if he catches COVID, he dies, right? And I had to sit there and be like, COVID's a lot like a seatbelt. It doesn't guarantee you won't get COVID, but it drastically reduces the possibility of you getting COVID, and if you do get COVID, of you dying from COVID, because your body will be more prepared to deal with it. And he was like, oh, well, you explained it to me much better than, I think he said, you explained it to me much better than the news did. And I was like, well, it didn't take me that long. And it aggravates me, because I'm just thinking about how many people out there aren't like anti-vaxxers.
You goddamn sheeple.
Right? They're not, it's like, you're not anti-vaxxers. The information has been presented to them so poorly by news trying to catch headlines, and that can cost lives.